Chapter 401. As time passed, some of the 11 blacksmiths could no longer hold on. Forging wasn't as simple as forging materials. This process was extremely taxing on one's physical strength, true energy, and even one's soul. It could be said that every strike of the hammer was a painstaking effort. This was also the reason why those true master blacksmiths were so revered and respected. There were even some master blacksmiths who would casually wave their hands after forging rare divine weapons, and countless experts would be willing to serve them at their beck and call. Finally, one of the participating blacksmiths was drenched in sweat. His lips were pale, and his true energy was exhausted. He felt dizzy and collapsed to the ground. 8,120 refinements. There was a person recording the number of refinements. 8,000 refinements. Although it's not high, it's still acceptable, said the old blacksmith. However, Gongsun Xianlong, who was on the top floor of the jewel forging building, didn't even look at him. Anything below 10,000 refinements was trash. If a blacksmith couldn't even reach 10,000 refinements, it meant that his future was limited. The blacksmith's face was ashen as he slowly shook his head. There was no need to continue the process. He had already lost. As time passed, another blacksmith couldn't hold on anymore. 9,250 refinements, said the person recording calmly. Then a third blacksmith. 10,300 refinements. Already 10,000 refinements. That's not bad, said the old blacksmith in admiration. The blacksmith who'd surpassed 10,000 refinements began the next step. After that, more and more blacksmiths stopped forging. Among them, the highest was only 21,000 refinements. That was enough to earn everyone's praise. Even Gongsun Xianlong, who was watching from the shadows, nodded slightly. Such a person can be considered for the Gongsun family, thought Gongsun Xianlong. At present, only 3 of the 11 participants were still forging. To everyone's surprise, Yi Guchen was one of the 3 people. Could it be that we've misjudged him? The spectating blacksmiths were extremely surprised. They looked suspiciously at Yi Guchen in the forging room. At this time, even Gongsun Xiaoye and Shintu Yuan slowed down their forging speed due to fatigue. But Yi Guchen, from the moment he held the casting hammer until now, had maintained an almost perfect speed without the slightest bit of delay. Even those who were prejudiced against Yi Guchen knew that the young man in the bamboo hat was no ordinary person. This kid is out of my expectations. Gongsun Xianlong was slightly surprised on the top floor of the jewel forging building. At first, he had doubted whether Yi Guchen could 10,000 refine. Now Yi Guchen had smithied more than 30,000 times, and he did not look tired at all. Gongsun Xianlong already had the intention of roping Yi Guchen into his Gongsun family. On the other side, Gongsun Xiaoye and Shintu Yuan were also paying attention to their opponents. When they saw that Yi Guchen was still persevering, they were stunned. However, they didn't care too much about it, because Yi Guchen's choice of materials meant that he wouldn't have a finished product in the end. Clang, clang, clang. Time passed by amidst the crisp sounds of hammering. The further they went, the more astonished the crowd became. It's already 70,000 refinements. A young blacksmith said with a trembling voice. 70,000 refinements was already an extremely shocking number. However, Yi Guchen and the other 2 showed no signs of stopping. In the end, when the person recording the number of times reported Yi Guchen's 100,000 refinements, the scene was already in an uproar. This was definitely a record for the younger generation of blacksmiths. I can't take it anymore. Gongsun Xiaoye's face was pale at this moment, clearly exhausted. Her previous record was 80,000 refinements, which had already crushed the group of blacksmithing geniuses in the Gongsun family. This 100,000 refinements had already exceeded her own limit. Even Gongsun Xiaoye was very satisfied with herself. However, what made her angry was that Shintu Yuan was still persevering. It was still Yi Guchen, who had infuriated her previously, who also didn't stop. I'm actually only third this time? This result was completely out of Gongsun Xiaoye's expectations. However, Shintu Yuan didn't surpass Gongsun Xiaoye by much. His final number of hammering stopped at 110,300 times. After that, in the entire venue, only Yi Guchen's forging room continued to resonate with the sound of hammering. The sound of metal colliding was like a heavy hammer that ruthlessly smashed into everyone's hearts. This kid is still persevering? Shin Tae-yuan's face was filled with shock. He was unwilling to believe the truth in front of him. Gongsun Xiaoya's red lips were also wide open. She had previously thought that Yi Guchen was staying because he was obstinate and opinionated. However, from the looks of it now, the person who was truly superficial was actually her. As for Madame Xiao, who had been mocking and hooting at the beginning, at this moment, her eyes were also filled with shock. She didn't dare to speak carelessly anymore. Could it be that young Master Yi is really a blacksmith? Xiao Wanru's jade-like hand slightly covered her mouth, somewhat in disbelief. The surrounding people's gazes towards Yi Guchen had completely changed. At this moment, no one dared to mock Yi Guchen's amateurish actions anymore. This was because Yi Guchen's current performance had completely shocked them. Just as everyone was feeling shocked, there was a strange movement from Yi Guchen's forging room. With a crisp cracking sound, his hammer, a low-grade spiritual inscription's divine weapon, was directly shattered. This scene was beyond everyone's expectations. The forging hammer shattered? The old blacksmith's eyes widened, and he immediately jumped up and down anxiously. They still wanted to know what the limit of the young man called Chen's forging was. How could they be willing to stop just like that? In the forging room, Yi Guchen was stunned as he looked at the smithing hammer that had been shattered into pieces. He suddenly recalled that the hammer that he had used to forge 100,000 refinements was the old drunkard's heavenly spirit vibrating hammer. Its quality was probably far superior to Gongsun Xiaoya's fire cloud hammer. This low-grade forging hammer naturally couldn't satisfy Yi Guchen's needs. However, Yi Guchen didn't feel that it was a pity. Although he hadn't reached his limit, if he could fuse the ice-fire mysterious heart essence, he could still win first place. Just as Yi Guchen was about to stop the forging, a figure suddenly appeared in front of Yi Guchen's forging room. "Use my forging hammer." This middle-aged man in cloth robes looked at Yi Guchen with a fiery gaze and handed over a dark forging hammer. "Who are you? This is the blacksmith convention. How can an outsider disturb the competition?" Seeing that someone was going to hand Yi Guchen a forging hammer, Shin Tae-yuan immediately stopped what he was doing, stood up, and berated loudly. Yi Guchen's performance had already exceeded his expectations. If he continued forging, Shin Tae-yuan wasn't sure how high the quality of the materials would be in the end. While Shin Tae-yuan was berating, Gongsun Xiaoya's delicate body trembled. She shouted in surprise, "Stinky Dad, why are you here?" As soon as she said that, the crowd went into an uproar. Shin Tae-miao's face stiffened, and he was momentarily speechless. Chapter 402. The head of the Gongsun family, Gongsun Xianlong, was obsessed with blacksmithing. At the same time, he was a 4-star blacksmith with an extraordinary status. With Shin Tae-yuan's status and identity, he was not qualified to meet Gongsun Xianlong. Therefore, he did not know that the middle-aged man in plain clothes in front of him was Gongsun Xiaoya's father, the head of the Gongsun family. "I'm here to watch my daughter's competition, and you call me an outsider?" Gongsun Xuanlong's eyes darkened. Moreover, he could see that Shin Tae-yuan did not want Yi Guchen to continue forging. However, how could Gongsun Xianlong give up the opportunity to test a talent? As a blacksmith, how can you be so jealous? Gongsun Xianlong said coldly as he waved his hand. A strong wave of true qi spread out and hit Shin Tae-yuan's body. He fell like a kite and landed heavily on the ground, his face covered in dust. If Gongsun Xianlong had not been worried that Shin Tae-yuan was still participating in the competition, his hand would have broken his bones. "I'm sorry. I was blind." Shin Tae-yuan stood up awkwardly, gritted his teeth and bowed. Then he returned to his forging room. He did not dare to be impudent in front of Gongsun Xianlong. Damn it, this kid was chosen by the head of the Gongsun family. However, it doesn't matter. The two materials he chose conflicted with each other and could not form a finished product. When the time comes, the head of the Gongsun family will know how blind he was. Shin Tae-yuan suppressed his anger. When he revealed his hidden strength, it was even stronger than Gongsun Xiaoya's. Originally, he could have shocked everyone in this blacksmith convention. However, everyone's eyes were now on Yi Guchen. Even Gongsun Xianlong personally appeared and lent his forging hammer to Yi Guqin. How could Shinta Yuan not be angry? On the other side, Gongsun Xianlong looked at Yi Guqin, who was covered by a bamboo hat, and said, "Junior, you're called Chun, right? I'll lend you my forging hammer. Show me all your strength." "Thank you, family head Gongsun." Yi Guqin cupped his fists. Through Gongsun Xiaoye, he learned that the plainly dressed man before him was the head of the Gongsun family. Yi Guqin took the hammer from Gongsun Xianlong and weighed it in his hand. It was very heavy and of high quality. Although it was still inferior to the old drunkard's heavenly spirit resonating hammer, it was still a rare forging tool. Gongsun Xianlong nodded and quietly retreated to the side. Gongsun Xiaoye stopped what she was doing and crossed her arms in front of her chest, staring at Yi Guqin. Phew! Yi Guqin exhaled slightly and secretly used the flawless Vajra body. Vigorous qi and blood flowed vigorously in his body. Clang, clang, clang. The sounds of the hammers were crisp and clear. Every hammer strike was extremely steady, but there was also a rhythm to it. At first glance, this kid's forging method seems ordinary and unremarkable. Now that I look at it, it's rather ingenious. Even a 4-star forging master like Gongsun Xianlong was amazed. How would he know that Yi Guqin was taught by the old drunkard? The old drunkard was not from the Saint Origin dynasty, but was a forging master from the Nantian region. There was no comparison between the two of them. At this moment, Yi Guqin was the only one in the entire place who was still forging. The number of times he was hammering increased exponentially. 130,000 refinements, 150,000 refinements, 180,000 refinements, 200,000 refinements. Just as Yi Guqin hammered down with 200,000 refinements, the sound of metal colliding was like thunder, echoing throughout the entire jeweled forging building. Boom! A dazzling brilliance was emitted from the material. That pure wave of energy shocked everyone. This is treasure light. It's a top-grade material. Gongsun Xianlong said with a hint of surprise. Treasure light was something that could only happen once in a blue moon even with his status as a 4-star forging master. It required luck. But now, Yi Guqin had hammered the material to this level with 200,000 refinements. It was extremely shocking. Even Gongsun Xianlong lost his composure, let alone Gongsun Xiaoye, Shinta Yuan and the other forging masters. Even LV Qinghan, who was watching from the side, was surprised for the first time. Even an outsider like her could sense that Yi Guqin's material was extraordinary. As for Madame Xiao, she was blinded by the brilliance. Her swollen face was drained of blood. Looking at the expressions of the people around him, from the initial disdain to the current shock, Yi Guqin's heart was as calm as an ancient well. This should be enough, Yi Guqin thought to himself. Actually, 200,000 refinements was far from Yi Guqin's limit. When he was in the qi refinement realm, he was able to reach Gongsun Xiaoye's record of 100,000 refinements. Now that his cultivation was much higher than before, how could his limit be just 200,000 refinements? It was just that Yi Guqin did not want to attract too much attention. It would be troublesome if that happened. So 200,000 refinements was enough. Of course, if Gongsun Xianlong knew Yi Guqin's true thoughts, he would not just be surprised. You're very good. The Gongsun family strongly invites you to join us. Gongsun Xianlong invited with a smile. Stupid dad, the competition isn't over yet. Gongsun Xiaoye shouted. Actually, she wanted to remind Gongsun Xianlong that Yi Guqin's material was difficult to forge into a divine weapon. Gongsun Xuanlong's mind turned slightly, and the smile on his face faded slightly. Haha, little brother, why don't we end the competition here? As for the knowledge about material attributes, after you join the Gongsun family, I can make the decision to open the library to you. Obviously, Gongsun Xianlong thought that he was giving Yi Guqin a way out. He recognized Yi Guqin's forging talent very much. But in terms of material attributes, it was really unsightly. It could even be said that he had not even reached the entry level. Yi Guqin naturally understood the meaning behind Gongsun Xuanlong's words. Gongsun Xianlong was offended by his choice of fire crystal and 100-year cold heart jade. Thank you for your kindness, Master Gongsun. I will definitely complete this competition, Yi Guchen said calmly. He was not participating in the competition to join the Gongsun family, but for the snow clay embryo. You don't know what's good for you. Not far away, Shin Yuan sneered. Even Gongsun Xiaoya was secretly annoyed, and stomped her feet. She reminded Gongsun Xianlong because she wanted to save some face for Yi Guchen at the end. Yi Guchen was so outstanding in forging. If the final product was not good, how embarrassing would that be? Seeing this, Gongsun Xianlong shook his head slightly and laughed. It's good to be young. When he fails this time, he should be less arrogant and join the Gongsun family with peace of mind. Chapter 403. Gongsun Xianlong did not mind Yi Guchen's rejection. In fact, he admired Yi Guchen's stubbornness. In his opinion, Yi Guchen knew that he would fail at the end, but he still wanted to continue. This spirit was worthy of recognition. Yi Guchen glanced at Gongsun Xianlong's eyes and knew what he was thinking. Indeed, one can only see further when one stands at a high place. Yi Guchen shook his head. If he had not met the old drunkard, perhaps he would not have seen as much as Gongsun Xianlong. However, this also encouraged Yi Guchen to leave the Saint Origin dynasty and head to a wider world. Yi Guchen dismissed the thoughts in his mind and focused on the next step of forging. The next step after forging was to combine the materials. By stacking materials of different attributes on top of each other and fusing them together. If the elements of the metal were compatible, its advantages would be fully displayed in this step. If the elements clashed, the result would be obvious. All the materials would be wasted. This was also the reason why all the blacksmiths were not optimistic about Yi Guchen's chances. The materials he chose almost completely clashed with each other. It was as if an outsider had randomly chosen them. Gongsun Xiaoya, Shin Yuan, and the others no longer paid attention to Yi Guchen and focused on their forging. In their opinion, Yi Guchen's outcome was already decided. There was no need to pay too much attention to it. Gongsun Xianlong also looked at Yi Guchen indifferently. He did not want to see Yi Guchen's final product. He was just wondering where Yi Guchen would fail. This step is the most crucial. Yi Guchen took a deep breath. He dismissed all distracting thoughts and focused on forging. What he wanted to forge was a sword. Because Yi Guchen only knew how to forge swords now. Among the forging techniques that the old drunkard passed down to me, the best one is naturally the forbidden forging technique. Human soul forging sword, dual cultivation of sword and life. However, I can't use it now. Yi Guchen thought. Refining swords with human souls, dual cultivation of sword and life. This forbidden forging technique was comparable to a god-tier forging technique. As for the god-tier forging technique, it was possible to forge a famed ancient sword. Furthermore, the old drunkard had repeatedly warned him that this forbidden technique could only be used once in a person's lifetime. The sword he forged would follow Yi Guchen for the rest of his life. Yi Guchen was also preparing to use this forbidden forging technique in the future to forge an accompanying divine weapon that was comparable to a famed primordial sword. Therefore, it was impossible for him to use it here. If that's the case, I'll have to use other casting techniques, Yi Guchen thought to himself. The old drunkard had taken Yi Guchen as his disciple, and had even passed down his forbidden forging technique to Yi Guchen. Naturally, he wouldn't be stingy with other casting techniques. In his spare time, Yi Guchen had also reviewed those forging techniques, but he had never actually used them. Just as Yi Guchen was deep in thought, he heard a burst of noise from the periphery. Almost everyone's gaze fell on Gongsun Xiaoya. This was because she had already used the Gongsun family's most famous casting technique. Green Lotus Fire Accumulation Casting Technique. Gongsun Xiaoya controlled the emerald crystal heart fire, and as the flames gathered, it vaguely formed the shape of a green lotus. As for the materials that had already been forged, they were wrapped in the fire lotus. Seeing this scene, even Gongsun Xianlong had a look of satisfaction in his eyes as he nodded slightly. This girl has indeed put in a lot of hard work in her forging. Her green lotus fire accumulation casting technique is already at 70% proficiency. Gongsun Xianlong sighed in his heart. His daughter was indeed a genius in the field of forging. At this moment, Shin Yuan, who was on the other side, also used one of the Shinto family's casting techniques. However, the Shinto family wasn't a family that specialized in forging, so his casting techniques were naturally inferior to the Green Lotus Fire accumulation casting technique. Even so, Shinto Yuan's casting techniques were superior to some of the other participating blacksmiths. As for Yi Guqin, before using his casting techniques, he had to first fuse the materials in order to successfully fuse the ice and fire mystic heart essence. Other than the number of times he had to forge it, there was also the temperature, etc. Most importantly, he had to fuse it with a flame of the same origin as ice and fire. Coincidentally, Yi Guqin's Heavenly Sun mystic underworld fire met this requirement. He thought for a moment, and as he used the Heavenly Sun mystic underworld fire, he wrapped it with the Vermilion Bird divine fire. This way no one would know Yi Guqin's true background. After that, Yi Guqin carefully stacked the Infernal Crystal, 100-year Cold Heart Jade, and Cloud Essence together. As he forged and fused them, he secretly used the Heavenly Sun mystic underworld fire to heat them up. As time passed, the three materials gradually fused together. Faintly, there seemed to be some kind of fluctuation that was about to be emitted. At the same time, Gongsun Xiaoye, Shinto Yuan, and the rest relied on their own casting techniques. The divine weapons that they had forged were almost ready. Gongsun Xiaoye's divine weapon was a sword, and she had fused the spiritual seal that she had prepared beforehand into it. After going through the complicated forging of the Green Lotus Fire accumulation casting technique, it was finally ready. The moment the sword appeared, it emitted an incomparably resplendent brilliance. It's a success! Gongsun Xiaoye jumped 3 feet high in excitement. Her delicate little face was full of sweat, but there was a trace of pride and joy. Well done! Although it's only a low-grade divine weapon with spiritual inscriptions, it's really rare for someone your age. Gongsun Xianlong took the sword. The body of the sword shone with a cold light, and the blade was as shiny as snow. Being able to forge a low-grade divine weapon with spiritual inscriptions meant that Gongsun Xiaoye was a top 2-star blacksmith. She could even be considered a 3-star blacksmith. With her talent, it was possible that she could become a 4-star blacksmith in the future. The surrounding crowd also burst out in praise. Tsk. She's indeed the young lady of the Gongsun family. Wanru, you must build a good relationship with her after the competition. Do you understand? We can't afford to offend such a talented blacksmith. Seeing this, Madame Xiao sternly warned Xiao Wanru. Xiao Wanru's lips curled into a bitter smile. Gongsun Xiaoye had completely crushed her in every aspect. Such shocking talent in blacksmithing also meant that Gongsun Xiaoye's status would be extraordinary in the future. Thinking of this, Xiao Wanru sighed in her heart. At the same time, her gaze involuntarily turned to Yi Guqin, who was still forging. I wonder how talented young Master Yi is in blacksmithing? Xiao Wanru thought to herself. In her heart, she imagined that if Yi Guqin really had talent comparable to Gongsun Xiaoye's in blacksmithing, then even if his status was not as high as Shinto Miao's, it would not be too far off. At this moment, the divine weapon that Shinto Yuan had forged was also out. He had forged an axe, and its quality had also reached the level of a low-grade divine weapon with spiritual inscriptions. However, it was slightly inferior to Gongsun Xiaoye's sword. It's a pity that my blacksmithing skills are not as good as the Green Lotus Fire forging technique of the Gongsun family. Otherwise, my divine weapon would definitely not be inferior to hers. Shinto Yuan was unconvinced. However, precious blacksmithing skills were like martial arts skills. They were very rare and could not be obtained easily. That fellow is still forging. Could it be that he doesn't have any blacksmithing skills? Shinto Yuan's gaze involuntarily turned to Yi Guqin. Not only him, but Gongsun Xiaoye, Gongsun Xianlong, LV Qinghan, and the people from the Xiao family all had their gazes fixed on Yi Guqin. This was because until now, among all the blacksmiths, only Yi Guqin had not used any blacksmithing skills. This made people wonder if Yi Guqin really had blacksmithing skills. I'm almost done forging. Next, I'll use that blacksmithing skill, Yi Guqin said to himself as he let out a light sigh. Chapter 404. There was no doubt about the importance of casting techniques to a blacksmith. It could be said that a top-notch casting technique could establish the foundation of a blacksmith family. Some rare casting techniques were almost never taught to outsiders. This was also why Shinta Yuan was jealous of Gongsun Xiaoya's Green Lotus fire forging technique. However, it was also because of the rarity of casting techniques that most blacksmiths did not have any casting techniques and could only forge weapons using ordinary methods. Yi Guqin, on the other hand, had been fusing and forging until now. He had not used his casting skills yet. Therefore, the surrounding people misunderstood and thought that Yi Guqin might not have any casting techniques. Gongsun Xianlong was not surprised by this. Casting techniques were rarer than martial arts, and it was indeed impossible for an unorthodox blacksmith to have any casting techniques. In his opinion, Yi Guqin should be the kind of blacksmith who had some talent but no background, so it was normal that he did not have any casting techniques. Sigh, what a pity. 200,000 refined materials, but no casting techniques. Gongsun Xiaoya shook her head regretfully. Shinta Yuan sneered. So what if it was 200,000 refined materials? Without a casting technique, it was impossible to forge a good divine weapon just by relying on this kind of forging. During this time, the divine weapons forged by the other blacksmiths in the competition were also out. However, the quality of those divine weapons were mostly ordinary spiritual weapons, and the highest was only a supreme-grade spiritual weapon. There was a huge gap between Gongsun Xiaoya and Shinta Yuan's results. If there were no surprises, the winner of this blacksmith convention would undoubtedly be Gongsun Xiaoya. Little brother, you have already tried your best. Without casting techniques, it is very difficult to forge a divine weapon. If you join the Gongsun family, you may be able to obtain the Green Lotus fire forging technique in the future. Gongsun Xianlong had a faint smile on his face. He asked himself, Yi Guqin should be tempted now that I've even taken out the Gongsun family's secret forging technique. Unfortunately, Yi Guqin was still indifferent. When the fire crystal, the 100-year cold heart jade, and the cloud marrow were about to merge together, the light in Yi Guqin's eyes under the bamboo hat suddenly became extremely sharp. At the same time, a terrifying transparent spiritual energy gushed out from Yi Guqin's sea of consciousness and directly seeped into the flame. Fire soul dual casting. Yi Guqin shouted in his heart. His incomparably vigorous soul force controlled the flames and completely wrapped the materials together. This is casting. All the blacksmiths who were watching the battle were shocked. Even if he had used the casting technique, they would not have been so shocked. However, Yi Guqin's casting technique was no weaker than the Green Lotus fire casting technique of the Gongsun family. It might even be better. Even Gongsun Xianlong lost his composure as he stared blankly at Yi Guqin, who had just performed his forging technique. What kind of casting technique is this? Gongsun Xiaoya's rosy little mouth was wide open. In addition, Shinta Yuan, LV Qinghan, and the three people from the Xiao family were all staring at Yi Guqin. They had never seen such a casting technique before. At this moment, Yi Guqin's expression was focused. Fire soul dual casting used spiritual energy to precisely control the flames and seep into every inch of the materials. This kind of forging technique had extremely high requirements for flames and soul power. In other words, even if this fire soul dual casting was given to Gongsun Xiaoya, Shinta Yuan, and the others, they would not be able to perform it. Only Yi Guqin, whose soul power was far beyond that of ordinary people, could use it. Along with the fire spirit dual casting, the three materials finally fused together perfectly and faintly transformed into a sword embryo. Boom. At the same time, an incomparably vigorous shockwave blasted the 5 transparent walls of Yi Guqin's casting room apart. An extremely resplendent light also shot out from the depths of the flames. It was as if a rare treasure had been born. That is. Gongsun Xianlong stared at the depths of the flame. It was as if he wanted to see the source of the brilliance. At this moment, Gongsun Xiaoya and Shinta Yuan were already speechless. They simply did not know what Yi Guqin had forged. This is not a shockwave that can be emitted by a piece of trash. Gongsun Xiaoya was inexplicably shocked and could not regain her senses for a moment. As for Shinta Yuan, he was even more frozen in place. His eyes were bloodshot as he stared at the depths of the flame. He did not believe it, nor did he want to believe it. Although he was dissatisfied that he had lost to Gongsun Xiaoye, he did not feel anything. After all, Gongsun Xiaoye was a famous forging genius. However, if he had lost to Yi Guqin, Shen Tuyuan would definitely not accept it. He did not believe that he would lose to a person with an unknown identity, who was hiding his head and showing his tail. I don't believe it. I definitely don't believe it. I want to see the finished product. At this moment, Shen Tuyuan was still hoping for a fluke. As the shockwave dissipated, Yi Guqin also withdrew his spiritual energy and flames. A sword embryo landed in his hand. Yi Guqin did not fuse his spiritual seal into it, as there was no need to. Although this sword embryo was not a spiritual inscription divine weapon, it was better than one. At a glance, the sword embryo was 3 feet long, and it was surrounded by brilliance. The body of the sword looked like it was carved out of jade and crystal. The strangest thing was that the sword embryo was translucent. One could clearly see that there were 2 kinds of brilliance, one red and one icy blue, swirling within it like fish. Not to mention other things, just from its appearance alone, this sword embryo was far superior to other divine weapons. This sword embryo should be called a work of art. That is. Gongsun Xianlong looked at the sword embryo, his eyes slightly dazed. In his vague memory, he seemed to have seen this material in a dusty ancient book in his family. However, at this moment, he was so shocked that he could not recall it for a while. This kid's forging skills are really amazing. That sword embryo is so beautiful. One look and you can tell that it is not an ordinary item. The surrounding forging masters were all in awe. Gongsun Xiaoye looked suspiciously at the sword embryo in Yi Guqin's hand. Wasn't it said that the fire crystal and the 100-year-cold heart jade clashed with each other and were difficult to fuse? Why was Yi Guqin able to fuse them, and it did not seem to be a waste? Not only was Gongsun Xiaoye suspicious, Shen Tuyuan was the first to stand up and say, "Kid, I don't care what special method you used, but a divine weapon is not just good looking. Maybe your sword embryo looks good on the surface, but it is so weak that it can't even withstand a single blow?" Shen Tuyuan gritted his teeth, unwilling to let Yi Guqin steal the limelight. "What do you want?" Yi Guqin said indifferently. "Do you dare to compete with the divine weapon that I have forged?" Shen Tuyuan held the axe that he had forged with extreme confidence. Yi Guqin shook his head slightly, and did not say anything else. In the next moment, he held the sword embryo in his hand, poured his true qi into it, and then threw it out. Boom! An incomparably terrifying force of ice and fire spread out with a loud bang. That gorgeous sword embryo drew an afterimage, piercing through the air and emitting a violent screech. Shen Tuyuan's face was suddenly shocked, and he hurriedly blocked with the axe in his hand. Whoosh! Almost like cutting through tofu, the sword embryo directly cut the axe in half, and then flew out close to Shen Tuyuan's cheek. Finally, it made a turn and fell back into Yi Guqin's hand. "Is this enough?" An extremely calm voice came out from Yi Guqin's mouth. A bloody wound appeared on Shen Tuyuan's cheek, and a drop of blood seeped out. If that sword embryo had been just a little closer to his head, plop! The brush with death actually caused Shen Tuyuan's legs to go soft, and he directly knelt on the ground. Chapter 405. Silence. It was so quiet that one could hear the rapid breathing of some blacksmiths. At this moment, the entire gem casting building had sunk into a strange deathly silence. Then there was a complete uproar. Oh my God, he broke a divine weapon with spiritual inscriptions with one slash. This sword embryo is at least a superior grade divine weapon with spiritual inscriptions. No, it's not just that. This sword embryo has yet to be infused with a spiritual imprint. So it's not a divine weapon with spiritual inscriptions. It's hard to imagine. If it were infused with a spiritual imprint, it would probably become a supreme grade divine weapon with spiritual inscriptions. I think this sword embryo has the foundation of a divine weapon with mystical inscriptions. All the blacksmiths were whispering to each other. The performance of Yi Guqin's sword embryo was too shocking. It was definitely a rare divine weapon. However, the most important thing was that the materials used by Yi Guqin were not only not of the highest quality, but also of conflicting attributes. To be able to use materials of conflicting attributes to forge such a divine weapon in the end. How many blacksmiths present could do that? Even the old blacksmiths were full of praises and felt ashamed of their inferiority. Shen Tuyuan, who was kneeling on the ground due to his weak legs, felt his mind go blank. The work that he was proud of after putting in so much effort was broken by Yi Guqin with one slash. Looking at the halved axe on the ground, Shen Tuyuan lost the ability to think. And Yi Guqin did not care about Shen Tuyuan at all. His tone was calm as he said to Gongsun Xiaoye, "Do you want to compete too?" "No. No need." Gongsun Xiaoye, who had a fiery personality like a little chili, stuttered as she replied. Even Shen Tuyuan's divine weapon had been broken by Yi Guqin with one slash. Even if the quality of the sword that she had forged was slightly better, it would not be much better. At this moment, if she still had doubts, she would be the only one losing face. "Young friend, can you let me take a look at this sword embryo?" Gongsun Xianlong asked after some hesitation. Generally speaking, any sword forged by a blacksmith, unless it was specially forged for others, would have the right to use it first. If the blacksmith was not willing, others would not even have the right to touch it. This was an internal rule in the smithing industry, so Gongsun Xianlong probed. Furthermore, his tone had changed from junior and little brother to little friend. From this, one could see the change in his attitude. Without any hesitation, Yi Guqin tossed the sword embryo to Gongsun Xianlong. He didn't care about this sword embryo. Gongsun Xianlong hurriedly rushed forward and raised his hands, as if he was holding a treasure. Even Gongsun Xiaoye was dumbfounded by his attitude. When had she ever seen her father act so cautiously? Impossible. Could this be? Gongsun Xuanlong's trembling hand brushed past the sword embryo. That kind of harmonious feeling made it hard to believe that it was formed by the fusion of two completely different materials. "Smelly Dad, did you see anything?" Gongsun Xiaoye asked curiously. It was not only her. Everyone else present was also staring at Gongsun Xianlong. "It can't be wrong. I've seen it in an ancient book in my clan. The material of this sword embryo is called the Ice-Fire Mystic Heart Essence." Gongsun Xianlong said in a trembling voice. "Ice-Fire Mystic Heart Essence? What kind of material is that?" Gongsun Xiaoye was puzzled. The other smiths were the same. They didn't know what the Ice-Fire Mystic Heart Essence formed by the fusion of the fire crystal and the 100-year-cold heart jade was. This Ice-Fire Mystic Heart Essence is a supreme material. It can even be used to forge tribulation divine weapons. Gongsun Xianlong couldn't hide his excitement as he spoke. Everyone, including Gongsun Xiaoye, was speechless. Even their breathing seemed to have stopped. They might not know the value of the Ice-Fire Mystic Heart Essence. However, they still knew the meaning of heavenly tribulation weapons. Tribulation divine weapons were above mystical rune divine weapons. There wasn't a single tribulation divine weapon in the entire Saint Origin dynasty. There was only one requirement to become a tribulation divine weapon, and that was to be able to withstand the baptism and tempering of tribulation divine weapons. One could imagine that a tribulation divine weapon that could withstand the bombardment of tribulation divine weapons was not something ordinary materials could compare to. And this Ice-Fire Mystic Heart Essence was a supreme material that could withstand the test of tribulation divine weapons. Tribulation divine weapon. Shen Tuyuan's mind shook. He was completely lost. No wonder his tribulation divine weapon had no resistance in front of this sword embryo. How could his spiritual rune divine weapon be compared to the materials used to forge tribulation divine weapons? There was no comparison at all. What kind of monster have I left behind? Shen Tuyuan roared in his heart. He recalled the scene where he had tried his best to persuade Yi Guqin to stay. If he hadn't said so much back then, perhaps Yi Guqin would have been pressured by the other smiths to leave. However, in the end, it was Shen Tuyuan himself who suppressed the voices of protest and asked Yi Guqin to stay. Could there be anything more ironic than this? When Shen Tuyuan thought about it, he wanted to beat himself to death at that time. An unparalleled sense of regret exploded in Shen Tuyuan's heart, causing him to spit out a mouthful of blood. However, it was a pity that no one was paying attention to Shen Tuyuan, the loser. It's really the Ice-Fire Mystic Heart Essence. Little friend. How did you know about this fusion method? Gongsun Xianlong lowered his stance completely and asked Yi Guchen in a tone of asking for advice. I learned about it by accident, Yi Guchen said lightly. He didn't want to reveal too much. Moreover, even if everyone here knew the secret of this fusion, they didn't have the heavenly sun mystic underworld fire and couldn't forge it for 200,000 times. Therefore, it was impossible to recreate the ice fire mystic heart essence. I was rude. Gongsun Xianlong didn't mind at all and was extremely humble. Previously, he thought that Yi Guchen would not turn back unless he hit a wall. Now that he thought about it, it was laughable. Even Gongsun Xianlong felt ashamed that he had been taught a lesson by a junior. Can you announce the result? Yi Guchen said calmly. His only goal was to repair the tribulation divine weapon with the snow clay embryo. Of course, Gongsun Xiaoye said hesitantly. She glanced at Yi Guchen from time to time, and thought about how she looked at Yi Guchen with disdain and disdain. She even wanted to tell him to leave. However, Yi Guchen's behavior made her seem like a frog at the bottom of a well and short-sighted. Thinking of this, Gongsun Xiaoye couldn't help but blush. Her shrewish personality was also restrained. Even Gongsun Xianlong treated Yi Guchen courteously. She didn't have the right to scold Yi Guchen. At this time, Gongsun Xianlong said to Yi Guchen seriously, Little friend, as the head of the Gongsun family, I strongly invite you to join the Gongsun family. If you join, you will be a core member of the Gongsun family. Gongsun Xianlong really didn't want to give up on Yi Guchen, such a good piece of jade. Hearing Gongsun Xuanlong's words, all the blacksmiths present revealed envious gazes. The Gongsun family was a super family and a blacksmith family with abundant resources. It could be said that almost all the blacksmiths present wanted to join the Gongsun family, but they didn't have the right. Little friend, if you join the Gongsun family, your future will be bright, the old blacksmith said with a sigh. Hearing this, Madame Xiao stood there in a daze, somewhat absent-minded. She couldn't believe that the lowly youth in her eyes had climbed up the social ladder and become a phoenix. His status had risen so quickly. Xiao Wanru's heart was filled with bitterness. A faint self-deprecating smile appeared at the corner of her mouth. She could only be a lowly concubine. If Yi Guchen joined the Gongsun family and became a core member, his status wouldn't be lower than Shin Miao's. His status as a blacksmith would be even more precious. I'm really stupid, but it's okay. In my heart, there's still someone. Whether it's young Master Yi or Shin Miao, they're far from being comparable. The Sword Master. Xiao Wanru clutched her chest. She could only comfort herself with the image of the Sword Master in her heart. At least this young Master Yi in front of her was far from the Sword Master in her heart. Thinking of this, Xiao Wanru felt slightly better. Chapter 406. The Gongsun family was not only a super family, but also a family of blacksmiths. It could be said that the status of a blacksmith was even higher than that of an ordinary martial artist. In order to obtain a suitable divine weapon, many experts were willing to become a blacksmith's hired thug. Therefore, the Gongsun family's foundation was even deeper than the average super family. Being invited by the Gongsun family and becoming a core member was definitely an opportunity that other blacksmiths could only dream of. The rest of the blacksmiths looked at Yi Guchen with envy in their eyes. Becoming a core member of the Gongsun family was like reaching the heavens in a single bound. However, Yi Guchen's expression was incomparably calm in the face of this opportunity that others could not even dream of. I'm sorry. Thank you for your kind offer, family head Gongsun, but I have no such intention. Yi Guchen cupped his fists. What? Hearing Yi Guchen's words, all the blacksmiths doubted their ears. This young man with extraordinary talent in blacksmithing actually rejected the Gongsun family's invitation? Even Gongsun Xianlong had a faint look of astonishment on his face. Gongsun Xiaoye opened her eyes wide and looked at Yi Guchen, as if she was looking at an idiot. She couldn't help but ask, Hey kid, do you know what kind of status the Gongsun family has in blacksmithing? Gongsun Xianlong glared at Gongsun Xiaoye, then turned to Yi Guchen and said, Xiaoye, don't be rude to our young friend. My young friend, the Gongsun family is a family of blacksmiths. Given your amazing performance in blacksmithing, If you are trained by the Gongsun family, your future will be bright. It's not impossible for you to become a 4-star or even a 5-star blacksmith. Gongsun Xianlong said with a hint of passion in his voice. Gongsun Xianlong was unwilling to give up on a talent like Yi Guqin. When the surrounding blacksmiths heard this, their hearts pounded rapidly. A 5-star blacksmith. It was rare to see such a person in the Saint Origin dynasty. And if they really did appear, then no matter if it was the royal family or the 7 great forces, they would have to treat them with respect, not daring to slight them in the slightest. Now Gongsun Xianlong said that Yi Guqin could become a 5-star blacksmith. How could this not be shocking? This little brother, just where did you come from? Xiao Lai's gaze was completely stunned. As for Madame Xiao and Xiao Wanru, their feelings were indescribable. On the other side, LV Qinghan's beautiful eyes revealed a strange light. She had never paid attention to Yi Guqin before, because with her status, it was indeed difficult for Yi Guqin to attract her attention. But now, even Gongsun Xianlong had made such a judgment. In LV Qinghan's heart, Yi Guqin's position suddenly increased. A person with the potential to become a 5-star blacksmith was worth befriending. In the face of Gongsun Xuanlong's promise, Yi Guqin's heart remained calm. Given his current situation, it was impossible for him to stay in the Gongsun family and learn forging in peace. Yi Guqin pondered for a moment before replying. Thank you for your kindness, Patriarch, but to be honest, I am only interested in forging. I don't specialize in it. What do you mean, little friend? Gongsun Xianlong was momentarily stunned. What I mean is, I am not a blacksmith who specializes in forging. My main occupation is sword cultivation, and forging is just a hobby. Yi Guqin had no choice but to speak the truth. This. Gongsun Xuanlong's eyes revealed a look of extreme shock. Not only him, but Gongsun Xiaoye and the other blacksmiths were also frozen in place, as if they had lost their souls. At first, no one thought highly of Yi Guqin. Later, Yi Guqin's 200,000 refinements shocked everyone. Then he fused the ice and fire mystic heart essence and cut Shinta Yuan's divine weapon in half. This made the blacksmith genius Gongsun Xiaoye speechless, and she could only admit defeat. But now this young man actually said that forging was just a hobby, and not his main occupation. He was actually a sword cultivator, who practiced the sword? Wah, you little brat, don't be so sarcastic. Gongsun Xiaoye was like an enraged tigress, baring her fangs and claws at Yi Guqin, as if she wanted to bite Yi Guqin. His words were really too hurtful. If Yi Guqin, who had such an amazing performance in forging, only treated forging as a hobby, how could these blacksmiths who specialized in forging but still lost to Yi Guqin accept this? At this moment, the other blacksmiths who participated in the competition were all short of breath and lowered their heads in shame. Gongsun Xiaoye put her hands on her hips, panting with anger. As for Shinta Yuan, he was frozen in place, as if he had lost his soul. His body was like a piece of wood, and his heart was like dead ashes. His heart of forging had been completely shattered by Yi Guqin. This meant that it would be difficult for Shinta Yuan to improve in forging in the future. It was no wonder that Shinta Yuan was like this. Even Gongsun Xianlong was almost emotionally unstable. Gongsun Xianlong coughed dryly and could only say, "Young friend's words are really straightforward. Since I have already won, can I choose a treasure material? I need a snow clay fetus," Yi Guqin said. "Yes, of course, I have it in my origin ring." Gongsun Xuanlong's origin ring flashed slightly, and a large snow clay fetus appeared. This snow clay fetus was like ice or snow, but its texture was soft, and it could merge with most metals to repair defects. Many thanks. Yi Guqin kept the snow clay fetus in his origin ring, and he gave the sword fetus to Gongsun Xianlong. Gongsun Xiaoye grabbed it in her hands, and loved it so much that she could not bear to part with it. Many thanks, young friend. Gongsun Xianlong could not suppress his joy. Even he did not expect that Yi Guqin would give him such a precious sword fetus of the ice-fire mystic heart essence. Yi Guqin did not care. He already had the Xianming heavy sword and the blood prison sword, and did not need this sword fetus. He might as well give it to the Gongsun family and form a good relationship. Yi Guqin did not want to stay any longer, and was about to leave. But at this moment, LV Qinghan walked lightly and landed in front of Yi Guchen. Yi Guchen stopped in his tracks and looked at the person who had come. The woman in front of him was dressed in white, like a snow lotus, and there was a trace of classical beauty in her coldness. At the same time, the aura that was faintly emitted from her body made Yi Guchen frown slightly. The woman in front of him was a talented girl with extraordinary strength. "Young master, would you do me the honor of coming to House Yinyan? Qinghan would like to invite you to a banquet." LV Qinghan's tone was as calm as water. Yi Guchen's eyes were slightly surprised. The woman in front of him was the top genius of Consonance Palace, LV Qinghan, who was on par with the young war emperor and the others. "Hey, senior sister LV, although you're a senior sister, you can't poach him like this." Gongsun Xiaoya jumped over and said with her cheeks puffed up. It seemed that Yi Guchen was being fought over by the two beauties. Envy appeared in the eyes of all the surrounding men. Not everyone had the qualifications to enjoy such treatment. However, when this scene entered Xiao Wanru's eyes, she felt that it was extremely dazzling. "Wanru, don't mind him. As long as he doesn't join the Gongsun family, he won't be as good as you." Madame Xiao comforted her. But Xiao Wanru did not listen to Madame Xiao anymore. "I still have something to do, so let's forget about it. But I think we'll meet again soon." Yi Guchen looked deeply at LV Qinghan. LV Qinghan would naturally be present at the Seven Forces exchange, so they could indeed meet again. Yi Guchen cupped his fists and left the Gem Forge building alone. Chapter 407. Looking at Yi Guchen leaving alone, LV Qinghan fell into deep thought. She had a feeling that the young man in front of her was not as simple as a forging genius. As for the surrounding people, they were all shaking their heads. Facing LV Qinghan, who was a top-notch beauty, status, and ability, Yi Guchen did not have the slightest intention of befriending her. This made people sigh. Seeing this, Xiao Wanru bit her lip slightly, and the bitterness in her eyes deepened. "Mother, did you see that? You said that young Master Yi did it to please me, but how does my status, and appearance compare to LV Qinghan's?" Xiao Wanru clenched her fists tightly. Even Madame Xiao, who was best at talking, was speechless. She could not refute Xiao Wanru's words. In terms of appearance, Xiao Wanru was indeed beautiful, but was LV Qinghan inferior to her? In terms of status, Xiao Wanru was just a concubine of a great family's young master, while LV Qinghan was a top prodigy of the seven major forces. It could be said that there was no comparison between the two. Yi Guchen had casually rejected LV Qinghan's initiative to befriend him. Would he try to please Xiao Wanru? "Oh madam, your prejudice against little brother is too deep." Xiao Lai also sighed deeply. Madame Xiao was embarrassed by her husband and daughter's words. However, she still could not swallow her pride and admit that she was wrong. Instead, she braced herself and said, "So what? That boy is arrogant and unwilling to join the Gongsun family. His status will still be inferior to ours in the future." "Madam, you are hopeless." Xiao Lai shook his head, completely disappointed in Madame Xiao. Xiao Wanru was silent, and her mood was gloomy. Their original purpose of coming here was to please Gongsun Xiaoya. However, now, even Madame Xiao did not have the face to please Gongsun Xiaoya. They left with their tails between their legs. On the other side, LV Qinghan's eyes flashed. "We will meet again soon." "What do you mean?" She sighed slightly. Although LV Qinghan wanted to befriend him, if he was unwilling, she would not try to please him. "Father, are we just going to let him go like this?" Gongsun Xiaoya asked while playing with the sword embryo. "Such a character shouldn't be a loner. I'm afraid he has some status. Fortunately, we're on good terms with him. It's also a form of good karma." Gongsun Xianlong sighed. He knew that a forcefully picked melon would not be sweet, and it was more likely that he would attract the other party's disgust. Sob. "Father, I don't want to marry that idiot Shen to Miao anymore." Gongsun Xiaoya stammered. "Nonsense." Gongsun Xianlong flung his sleeves and said, "It's true. She said that if anyone wins against Xiaoyu will marry him." Gongsun Xiaoyu rolled her eyes. What Gongsun Xiaoya really liked were forging geniuses. Yi Guchen was the only person in the younger generation who was better than her in blacksmithing. Although it was impossible for Gongsun Xiaoya to marry Yi Guqin directly, she did have a deep curiosity about Yi Guqin. When Gongsun Xianlong heard this, he shook his head and said, "Since that little friend hid his identity, I'm afraid his background is not that simple. It's fine to be friends with such a person, but it's impossible to entrust your life to him. If you know that kid's identity, will you agree to it?" Gongsun Xiaoya asked mischievously. "No. Little girl, you'd better marry Shen to Miao. Don't have any delusions." Gongsun Xianlong snorted coldly. Gongsun Xiaoya pouted, looking aggrieved. However, it was obvious that Gongsun Xiaoya would not give up so easily. After the blacksmith convention, the news about Yi Guqin spread throughout northern Liang City at an astonishing speed. The blacksmith convention was only a competition organized by Gongsun Xiaoya. Logically speaking, it should not have caused much of a stir. However, Yi Guqin's appearance made the blacksmith convention, which not many people knew about, known to almost everyone. In particular, Yi Guqin had fused the ice-fire mystic heart essence, the forging material for the heavenly tribulation divine weapon. This alone was enough to cause a stir. After all, the heavenly tribulation divine weapon had never appeared in the Saint Origin dynasty. Now, even if only one of the materials for the heavenly tribulation divine weapon had appeared, it was enough to cause a stir. However, this was not the most important thing. What really caused a stir in northern Liang City was Gongsun Xuanlong's evaluation of Yi Guqin. He might become a 5-star blacksmith. Gongsun Xianlong was one of the most influential blacksmiths. Whether or not this was true, it meant that Yi Guqin's future achievements would not be low. Not to mention a 5-star blacksmith. Even a 4-star blacksmith would be respected by powerhouses everywhere. It was this evaluation that made the blacksmith convention, which was originally a niche event, known to everyone. Even many disciples of the 7 great forces were discussing it. Hey, did you guys hear that a blacksmith genius appeared in the blacksmith convention? I heard that even Gongsun Xiaoya of the Gongsun family was defeated wholeheartedly. Do you think that the genius could be a hidden genius of the 7 great forces? I don't think so. Such a blacksmith genius can't be unknown. If he really becomes a 5-star blacksmith in the future, I'm afraid the 7 great forces will treat him like a living Buddha. The people of the various forces were discussing it. At this moment, Yi Guqin, who had caused quite a stir in northern Liang City, and even became the topic of many people's conversation, rented a secluded courtyard with a forging room, and began to repair the blood prison sword and heavenly demon general armor. The blood prison sword and heavenly demon general armor were both supreme-grade mystical inscription divine weapons, so it was not easy to repair them. Fortunately, the snow clay fetus had the ability to repair metals on its own, so it did not require much effort from Yi Guqin. He only needed some time. After using the snow clay fetus to repair these 2 divine weapons, although it's impossible to completely repair them, I should be able to use some spiritual inscription arrays to strengthen them. Yi Guqin looked at the divine weapons in front of him, took out the snow clay fetus, and began to repair and refine it. Just as Yi Guqin began to repair the divine weapons on the other side, Xiao Wanru, who was temporarily staying in the inn, sneaked out when Madame Xiao and the others were not paying attention. She ran to the entrance of northern Liang City, and found the smelly ditch where Madame Xiao had thrown away the jade slip. Wanru might have reaped what she sowed. Xiao Wanru bit her cherry lips so hard that blood seeped out slightly. Whether it was Shen Miao's harsh words or the incident at the blacksmith convention, Xiao Wanru had completely lost her dignity. She felt like a laughable clown. Young Master Yi did not join the Gongsun family. Perhaps he can't help me escape the fate of being a concubine, but... Xiao Wanru made up her mind and jumped into the ditch to search for the jade slip that had been thrown away. She did not care that she was dirty all over. The stench from the mud made Xiao Wanru vomit incessantly. However, she only smiled miserably. She had reaped what she sowed. If she had not listened to Madame Zhao's advice at that time, she would not have humiliated herself like this now. After rummaging for a long time, Xiao Wanru finally found that dirty jade slip. She wiped the jade slip with her sleeve and put it inside her clothes. As far as Xiao Wanru was concerned, she would not use this jade slip. She did not want to implicate Yi Guqin in dealing with the Shinto family. If Yi Guqin had agreed to Gongsun Xuanlong's request at the blacksmith convention and become a core member of the Gongsun family, Xiao Wanru might have thought of using the jade slip. However, Yi Guqin had rejected it. Xiao Wanru did not know Yi Guqin's true identity, so when she saw that Yi Guqin had rejected joining the Gongsun family, she completely dismissed the idea of using the jade slip. Now, she only treated this jade slip as a comfort and something to rely on. Chapter 408. Northern Liang City. The storm caused by Yi Guqin at the blacksmith convention had yet to subside. Something even bigger was about to happen. That was the 7 Great Forces exchange. Now the barbarian race had come in full force. They had breached the Great Wall and occupied 1/3 of the cities in the Great Desolation Prefecture. The barbarian race's attack this time was unprecedented. Therefore, during this period of time, the 7 Great Forces were also discussing and breaking in their strategies. However, the 7 Great Forces were entrenched in a complicated relationship, and they were inextricably linked to each other. It was impossible for them to completely cast aside their disloyalty and unite together sincerely. Therefore, the final plan was to divide the battle zones and deal with different barbarian tribes. Among the barbarians, there were strong and weak ones, and each of them had different fighting styles. For example, the Fire Tribe, the Thunder Tribe, and the other powerful barbarian tribes not only controlled many kinds of strange flames and thunders, but also had violent personalities. Those who fought against them would either die or be injured. On the other hand, the Blood Barbarian Tribe, Bone Barbarian Tribe, Soul Barbarian Tribe, and the others mostly cultivated some strange and evil techniques of the Barbarian Tribe. They were extremely cruel and bloodthirsty, so no force was willing to go against them. As for the Wood Tribe, the Water Tribe, and the other barbarian tribes, their attitudes were slightly gentler. Even the Wood Tribe was a barbarian tribe that favored peace and neutrality. They had always opposed war. Hence, when the 7 Great Forces fought against different berserker tribes, they would suffer different losses. Every time there was an exchange, the 7 major forces would send their geniuses to battle. The winner would have the right to choose his opponent first. In the previous social gatherings, the Limitless Sword Sect or the Sealed Saber Monarch Palace were the ones that obtained first place. As for the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest, most of them were in the middle and lower reaches. The reason was extremely simple. Because within the Sword Sect's forest of pagodas, only Yan Wushuang could truly be considered a top genius. Even Bai Zichen could only be considered half of it. Thus, in the end, the opponents of the Sword Faction's Tower Forest were mostly savage and ruthless berserkers, causing the Sword Faction's Tower Forest to suffer great losses. In the opinion of most people, the Sword Sect Tower Forest originally had the hope of obtaining first place this time. However, because of Yi Guqin's death, everyone felt that the result of the exchange wouldn't change at all, and the Sword Sect would still be at the bottom. The location of the exchange was a huge arena located in the center of northern Liang City. On all 4 sides of the fighting arena, there was a circular viewing platform. In the center was a pyramid-like trapezoidal building. On the pyramid, there were 7 distinct platforms from the highest to the lowest. They corresponded to the first place to the 7th place. At this moment, the fighting arena was already filled with people. Not only were there many martial arts experts from northern Liang City, but there were also some super families that came to show their support. A group of people walked out from the crowd, and the surrounding crowd automatically parted. At the same time, their eyes were filled with respect. So its family head Gongsun. Greetings, clan leader Gongsun. This group of people was naturally from the Gongsun family. The middle-aged man in cloth robes leading them was none other than Gongsun Xianlong. As a family of blacksmiths, the Gongsun family's connections were even deeper than those of ordinary super families. On top of that, due to the fact that the Gongsun clan was in charge of forging divine weapons, even the 7 major powers treated the Gongsun clan with respect. Beside Gongsun Xianlong was a beautiful figure in red, causing the eyes of many people to light up. It was Gongsun Xiaoye, the little pepper of the Gongsun family. However, many people averted their gazes after glancing at him. This was because Gongsun Xiaoye was already taken. She was Shin Miao's fiancée. However, Their gazes were a little strange. This was because Gongsun Xiaoya, who was usually extremely shrewish and extroverted, was currently playing with the sword embryo that was overflowing with ice and fire. The surrounding spectators all knew that the young man who had forged the sword embryo was the only blacksmith genius who had surpassed Gongsun Xiaoya. Gongsun Xianlong shook his head helplessly when he saw Gongsun Xiaoya's distracted look. Ever since the blacksmith conference, this daughter of his had been constantly playing with the sword embryo, which made Gongsun Xianlong feel helpless. At one point he even wanted to look for Yi Guqin. However, after the conference, Yi Guqin disappeared like smoke. Even though Gongsun Xianlong wanted to keep track of Yi Guqin, he still lost track of him. This girl is really obsessed, Gongsun Xianlong sighed. At this moment, another group of people walked over from the opposite side. The middle-aged man leading the group had a sturdy build. He was 70% similar to Shintu Miao. He was the current head of the Shintu family, Shintu Miao's father, Shintu Zhan. Beside him was Shintu Miao, who was carrying a tall saber on his back. His gaze was disdainful, with a ferocious aura. On the other side, Shintu Yuan was also following. However, his face was lifeless. Clearly, he had not walked out from the shadow of the blacksmith conference. Brother Xianlong, how have you been? Shintu Zhan looked at Gongsun Xianlong and smiled as he cupped his hands. Now the entire northern Liang city knew that the Gongsun family and the Shintu family were going to have a marriage alliance. In the future, their prestige would be even greater. Brother Zhan, it's been a long time. Gongsun Xianlong also cupped his hands. However, the smile on his face was not that sincere. The world only knew that the Gongsun family and the Shintu family were going to have a marriage alliance. However, they did not know the deeper relationship between them. It was definitely not an ordinary marriage alliance. With the Gongsun family's heritage, there was no need for them to have a marriage alliance with the Shintu family. The reason was that the Shintu family had accidentally obtained a blacksmith's handbook. That handbook recorded the insights of a blacksmith master from the Nantian region. This kind of comprehension was definitely attractive to any blacksmith. Gongsun Xuanlong's father, the Gongsun family's old ancestor, Gongsun Yu, had been stuck at the pinnacle of 4-star, unable to break through to 5-star. As for the master's handbook that the Shintu family had obtained, it was extremely helpful for Gongsun Yu to break through to 5-star blacksmith. It was also because of this that the Shintu family had proposed a marriage alliance. After the two families became one, they would directly give the master's handbook to the Gongsun family as a betrothal gift. The pinnacle of 4-star and 5-star seemed to be only a thin line apart. However, the difference in status was like heaven and earth. A pinnacle of 4-star would be treated with great courtesy by the 7 major factions. However, if it was a 5-star, the 7 major factions would be willing to treat him as a guest of honor. It could be said that if Gongsun Yu broke through to 5-star, then the Gongsun family could become the 8th major faction outside of the 7 major factions. Therefore, Gongsun Yu had given the order to obtain the master's handbook no matter what. Compared to the revival of the family, what was Gongsun Xiaoya's happiness? After much consideration, no matter how much Gongsun Xianlong loved his daughter, he could only harden his heart and marry her off to the unwilling Shintu Miao. Shintu Zhan naturally saw the falsehood in Gongsun Xuanlong's smile. However, he did not care. As long as he had the master's handbook, he was not afraid that the Gongsun family would go back on their word. Chapter 409. Shintu Zhan looked at Gongsun Xiaoya and said with a smile, "Haha, my good daughter-in-law. The blacksmith convention that was held recently has spread throughout the entire northern Liang city. It's rare to have such a reputation at such a young age." Although the two families had yet to hold the wedding ceremony, Shintu Zhan had already addressed her as his daughter-in-law. However, what made Shintu Zhan unhappy was that Gongsun Xiaoya did not respond to him at all. Instead, she kept playing with the sword embryo. Shintu Zhan's face darkened. Seeing this, Gongsun Xianlong tugged at Gongsun Xiaoya's sleeves and said, "Xiaoya, don't be rude. Quickly reply." "Seriously, how did that brat forge it? Damn it," Gongsun Xiaoya muttered. She raised her head and glanced at the Shintu family. She said calmly, "Greetings, everyone." After that, She went back to playing with the sword embryo. Shin Tizhan snorted coldly. Although he was unhappy, he could not lower himself to argue with the girl. He looked at Gongsun Xianlong and said, "Brother Xianlong, the marriage between the two families is not something that my Shinta family forced upon your Gongsun family. It was ancestor Gongsun who strongly wanted the marriage between the two families, so..." Shin Tizhan paused. His gaze was arrogant and he did not continue. "Brother Zhan, you must be joking. My daughter is just a little naughty. The marriage is unshakable." Gongsun Xianlong could only smile apologetically. However, he suppressed the anger in his heart. To think that he was the head of a great family and a 4-star blacksmith master. Now he had to lower his voice to Shin Tizhan. Looking at Shin Tizhan's arrogant attitude, Gongsun Xianlong wanted to slap him. However, when he recalled the warning of his father, Gongsun Yu, he suppressed his anger. Shin Miao, who was standing beside Shin Tizhan, frowned slightly when he saw Gongsun Xiaoya. In the past few days, he had heard about the blacksmith convention from Shin Tizhan. However, what Shin Miao cared about was Gongsun Xiaoya's attitude towards the youth called Chun. "Xiaoya, is the sword embryo that pretty?" Shin Miao smiled and asked. He was cold and arrogant when facing Xiao Wanru and the others. However, he did not dare to look down on Gongsun Xiaoya. "What is a layman like, you know? Don't bother me," Gongsun Xiaoya said in annoyance as she stroked the sword embryo. Shin Miao's expression turned slightly ugly as he was given the cold shoulder. "Xiaoyu, you are my fiancé. Don't get involved with those shady people." Shin Miao's tone turned cold. Scram. Gongsun Xiaoya spat out a single word. The blacksmithing genius that even she had to admit defeat and was unable to defeat had actually become a dubious person in Shin Tong's words? "Haha, it's normal for young couples to quarrel. Let's both take a step back." Shin Tizhan's tone was indifferent. "Cousin, I think that cousin-in-law misses that youngster by the name of Chun." At this moment, Shin Yuan quietly whispered into Shin Miao's ear, "Don't let me run into that kid, or else." Shin Feng's face darkened when he heard this. And in Shin Yuan's eyes, there was a trace of coldness, as if his scheme had succeeded. What he wanted to do was to incite hatred between Shin Miao and Yi Guchen. He even wanted to borrow the power of the entire Shinta family to deal with Yi Guchen. This was because Shin Yuan already hated Yi Guchen to the core. After the arrival of the Shintu and Gongsun families, many other families arrived. As for Xiao Wanru and the rest, they did not have the status and qualifications to watch the exchange. They could only hide in the inn and wait for Shin Miao's wedding day after the exchange. Just as the crowd was anxiously waiting, the people from the 7 great factions finally appeared one after another. The first to appear was the Limitless Sword Sect. A huge flying divine weapon that looked like a sword carried the people from the Limitless Sword Sect over. The leader was a middle-aged man dressed in a black and white robe. His eyes were like the sun and moon in the sky, and he gave off an incomparably dignified and deep aura. It was the Sun Moon Hall Master of the Limitless Sword Sect, Xian Tai. "That's Hall Master Xian Tai. Yes, I heard that he has already broken through to become a divine dwelling expert. His strength is unfathomable." In the arena, many people's gazes fell on Xian Tai. Previously, Xian Tai had also appeared in the 10 Prefectures elite gathering. At that time, he was only a half-step divine dwelling expert. However, he had now become a true divine dwelling expert. The prestige of the Limitless Sword Sect had become even stronger. Behind Xian Tai, besides the various elders, were the elite disciples of the Sun Moon Hall. Xian Hao stood among them. His long black and white hair fluttered in the wind. He was cold and handsome, and looked down on everything. In addition, Xian Feng and Xian Dai, the twins known as the Black and White Impermanents, were also among them. Murong Ditian was also among the crowd. It could be said that the Sun Moon Hall's disciples were all elites. "If you don't get first place this time, bear the consequences yourselves," Xian Tai warned coldly. "Hee, rest assured, Hall Master. It's just a simple exchange. Isn't it easy to get first place?" Xian Dai giggled. She glanced at Xian Hao and said with deep meaning, "Fortunately, Yi Guchen of the Sword Sect has died in the Void Sword Realm. Otherwise, senior brother Xian Hao would be very nervous." "Why talk about a dead person? Or do you want to test my bottom line like Yi Guqin? Xianhao's eyes were cold. All right, stop arguing. Let's wait for the exchange to begin. Xiantai waved his hand. The group of people from the Limitless Sword sect landed on the highest level of the arena. Even superfamilies like the Shintu and Gongsun families nodded at Xiantai and the rest. Divine dwelling experts were what the superfamilies lacked in terms of strength and foundation. Afterwards, people from the titled Saber King Palace also arrived. The person leading them was wearing a golden robe. He had a weathered face, and was the Deputy Palace Master, Imperial Saber Yubufan. Is that Imperial Saber Yubufan? This is the first time I've seen him. I heard that 10 years ago, he and the Crimson Sword King, Feng Manlu, fought at the peak of the Forbidden Purple Mountain. It was a pity that I didn't have the chance to see them. Yubufan's arrival had once again raised a clamor. Just like Feng Manlu, Yubufan rarely appeared in front of the crowd after the battle at the Forbidden Purple Mountain. However, he was also a top expert of the Saint Origin dynasty. He was also known as a legend of the Saber Dao. Not only him but his disciple Guzun was also famous in the Saint Origin dynasty. However, Guzun did not come to this exchange, which made many people feel that it was a pity. Feng Manlu, it's time for you to announce the news in this conference. Announce to the world that the promise of 10 years will be held at the summit of the Forbidden City. My successor has already been decided. Who is your successor? Yubufan's eyes were deep as he thought to himself. Behind him, Demonic Saber Lungju, Fiendish Saber Nialing, and Blood Saber Emojuechen. Apart from Guzun, the three most famous Saber Kings of the titled Saber King Palace had all arrived. It was obvious that the titled Saber King Palace intended to take first place in this exchange. With the arrival of the Limitless Sword sect and the titled Saber King Palace, the atmosphere became a little more solemn. After all, these factions were all led by divine dwelling experts, a fact that made one feel a sense of respect. Just as the atmosphere became a little solemn, a jade-white flying boat flew over. It carried a group of beautiful women. They were the female disciples of the Consonant's divine palace. Chapter 410. The leader of the white flying boat was an old woman. Although she was old, her skin was still glossy, but her expression was cold. She was clearly not in a good mood. The old woman was the Vice Palace Master of Consonant's Palace, and was also a divine dwelling expert. Beside her were several beautiful middle-aged women and elders, LV Qinghan, Zither Fairy and other core female disciples of Sky Immortal Palace. I didn't expect Grandma Shichuan to be the leader of Consonant's Palace. But why does she look so bad? Don't you know? I heard that Pan Shuelian, who died at the hands of the Sword sect, was one of Grandma Shichuan's disciples. Her disciple has already died at the Heaven Pride's gathering. How can she be in a good mood? Some people who knew a little bit about the situation whispered. Grandma Shichuan's expression froze. She glanced at Zither Fairy, causing Zither Fairy's heart to sink. Zither Fairy, you colluded with outsiders to deal with a disciple of the palace. If not for the palace master's order to protect you, I would have made you pay a price. Grandma Shichuan did not have a good impression of Zither Fairy. This disciple was wrong. Zither Fairy bit her red lips and lowered her head. Whether it was inside or outside Consonant's Palace, every time, the one who provoked and threatened her was Pan Shuelian. Zither Fairy had always been the one who tolerated. However, Grandma Shichuan turned a blind eye to this. She only believed that Zither Fairy had colluded with Yi Guqin to harm Pan Shuelian. As for Pan Shuelian colluding with Feng Chun, Ji Yan and the others, she did not mention a single word. Grandma Shichuan, the exchange is near. Let's focus on the present. LV Qinghan stepped forward and stood in front of Zither Fairy. Since Qinghan has interceded for you, then forget it. Fortunately, the culprit, Yi Guqin, is already dead. Otherwise, I would have made him kneel in front of Shuelian's cenotaph and kowtow to repent. Grandma Shichuan said in an unfriendly tone. Pan Shuelian had been dismembered by Yi Guqin. She had died a miserable death, and not even a complete corpse was left behind. In the end, she could only erect a cenotaph in Consonant's Palace. Zither Fairy's face paled when she heard this because she had poked her sore spot. LV Qinghan also sighed. She didn't know when her junior sister would be able to walk out of the negative influence of Yi Guqin. Following the arrival of the group of eye-catching female disciples from the Consonant's Divine Palace, the originally solemn atmosphere in the entire battle arena relaxed a little. At this moment, another group of people arrived on a flying boat. The people from the 3 imperial palaces have arrived. Someone recognized him with a single glance. He was a robust man with long, fiery red hair. His eyes were the same as the dead Ji Yan's. They were crimson like crystals, and it was as if flames were about to spurt out from his eyes. That must be one of the 3 emperors of the 3 imperial palaces, the Yan Emperor. Some people looked at the red-haired man and thought. The reason why the 3 imperial palaces were called that was because they had 3 emperors, all of whom were divine-dwelling experts. The Yan Emperor was one of them. Each of the 3 rulers had a true disciple. The true disciple of the Flame Emperor was Ji Yan, who had died at the hands of Yi Guqin. However, it seems like the Yan Emperor's mood isn't any better than Grandma Shichuan's. Some people who were watching the show thought. At this moment, the Yan Emperor's expression was even colder than Grandma Shichuan's. This was because Pan Shuelian was at most one of Grandma Shichuan's disciples. Ji Yan, on the other hand, was the only true disciple of the Yan Emperor. His status was special. How could the Yan Emperor be in a good mood when his only true disciple had died? How hateful. Why did Yi Guqin die? It would have been great if he was still alive. Then, I would have let him have a taste of death 10 times more painful than my disciples. The Yan Emperor's voice was cold and filled with hatred. Senior Yan Emperor, why are you sulking over a dead person? Zhou Tong, who was dressed in white, comforted the Yan Emperor. I'm afraid that Yang Haotsong won't be able to come on time. You must achieve a good result in this exchange. Don't embarrass the old Ling Emperor. The Yan Emperor's tone softened. Yang Haotsong was the name of the Little War Emperor. Senior Yan Emperor, don't worry. I'll leave for a while. Zhou Tong cupped his hands and flew towards the Consonant's palace. Wow, it's Zhou Tong. Is he the true disciple of the 3 imperial palaces' Ling Emperor? He's so handsome. I heard that his character are impeccable. Some of the female disciples of the Consonant's palace were infatuated. Among them, there was a beautiful lady in a flowery dress who came forward. She was the same as Pan Shuelian, a disciple of Grandma Shichuan. Her name was Ren Tingting. She was elegant and beautiful. She could be considered a rare beauty. At the same time, her cultivation was at the 9 transformation divine soul realm. Although her strength was slightly weaker than LV Qinghan's, it wasn't too far off. Young Master Zhou, are you here to look for Tingting? Ren Tingting came forward and asked shyly. She had met Zhou Tong a few times before. No matter how shrewd Zhou Tong was, in the eyes of outsiders, his appearance, strength, status, and character were all perfect. It was no wonder that even a prideful lady like Ren Tingting was infatuated with him. The person I'm looking for is Zither Fairy. Zhou Tong moved past Ren Tingting and arrived in front of LV Qinghan and Zither Fairy. Ren Tingting's expression froze. She turned her beautiful eyes to Zither Fairy with deep jealousy in them. She was unwilling to give up and also came to their side. I'll definitely get into the top 3 in this exchange. When it's over, I hope junior sister will give me face and come to House Yunyan for a gathering. Zhou Tong's tone was gentle and affectionate. Ren Tingting's heart was filled with jealousy. Zither Fairy wanted to refuse, but LV Qinghan said with a faint smile, "Sure, but it depends on your performance." Haha, of course. Senior sister will also give me face. Zhou Tong smiled. Well, young Master Zhou, Ren Tingting's face was slightly embarrassed. Sorry, this is a small private gathering of mine. Zhou Tong tactfully declined. After the exchange, Zhou Tong made up his mind to thoroughly win over Zither Fairy's heart. He had already told LV Qinghan that LV Qinghan would take the opportunity to leave, leaving only him and Zither Fairy. Regardless of whether Zither Fairy accepted him or not, Zhou Tong had his own methods to take her virginity. How could he casually let an outsider join his plan? However, Ren Tingting didn't know this, and the jealousy in her heart only grew stronger. She couldn't help but say, although young Master Zhou has good intentions, junior sister Qin doesn't seem to appreciate it. Right now, her mind is only filled with that bastard sword sect that killed junior sister Xuelian. What did you say? Shut up. Zither Fairy's face was filled with anger. It was fine for her to be wronged, but Ren Tingting's words about the bastard sword sect was intolerable. What? Didn't I say that you colluded with that shameless sword sect and plotted against junior sister Xuelian? It's a pity that such a good girl was schemed against by a pair of dogs like you. Truly pitiful. Ren Tingting deliberately spoke in a loud voice, attracting the attention of the surrounding people. Grandma Shichuan glanced at her, then ignored her. In her heart, she thought that it was fine to let Ren Tingting teach Zither Fairy a lesson. Zither Fairy was so angry that blood rushed to her head, and a trace of blood flowed from the corner of her mouth. It was clearly Pan Xuelian's vicious heart that schemed against them. But now, Ren Tingting was saying that it was Zither Fairy and Yi Guchen's fault? Zither Fairy was so angry that her delicate body trembled, and her face turned pale. Ren Tingting's heart was filled with joy, and she wanted to laugh out loud. At the same time, she saw Zhou Tong's slightly gloomy face. She was even more pleased with herself. Ren Tingting had done this on purpose to let Zhou Tong see that Zither Fairy only had Yi Guchen in her heart, and not Zhou Tong. This way, Ren Tingting would have a chance to interfere. Her scheming was exactly the same as Pan Xuelian's. Chapter 411. Seeing that Ren Tingting had insulted Yi Guchen, the Zither Fairy's face turned pale and blood flowed from the corners of her mouth. Zhou Tong's heart turned cold. Zhou Tong's heart surged with coldness. Although he had heard of Yi Guchen's achievements, he had never met him. Therefore, he did not think that Yi Guchen was better than him. This was because many things would become more and more exaggerated after being spread. This was also the source of Zhou Tong's dislike of Yi Guchen. However, he was quite scheming and did not show it on his face. Instead, he said to Ren Tingting, "Miss, how can you say that about Yi Guchen of the sword sect? I believe that he is a heaven pride worthy of respect." With these words, the Zither Fairy looked at Zhou Tong and unconsciously became more pleasing to the eye. She actually revealed a slight smile and said, "Many thanks, young Master Zhou." "It's nothing." Zhou Tong smiled. "Young Master Zhou, you've been deceived. That shameless sword sect is ruthless and vicious. They can't be compared to even 1/10,000th of you." Ren Tingting hurriedly flattered, afraid that Zhou Tong would dislike her. "Miss, please don't say any more." Zhou Tong's face was like this, but there was an extremely faint smile at the corners of his mouth. So what if he was a sword sect? So what if he was powerful? He still ended up being slandered after his death. Zhou Tong sneered in his heart. "If you only know how to use force, you are nothing more than a boorish man. In the end, you will only end up like Yi Guchen dead. Only by using both intelligence and force can you be like me and obtain all the fame and status." Zhou Tong fanned himself. He was already thinking about his plan for House Yunyan after the exchange. At this moment, another group arrived in the distance. The leader was an old man in azure robes. He was the deputy sect master of the 9 Profound sect, Qing Yang. Behind him were several people who had some relationship with Yi Guchen, such as Chun Yi and Bai Yanji. Afterwards, people from the Saint Origin Academy also arrived. The leader was a divine-dwelling expert from the Saint Origin Empire, Hun Tianho. Behind him was a group of heaven prides and elites from the Saint Origin Academy. Feng Chun, who had participated in the Void Sword realm, was also among them. As for Prince Yuani, he was nowhere to be seen. Although Feng Chun had saved Prince Yuani in the Void Sword realm, his injuries were too severe. He was still recuperating and would not be able to get out of bed for a few months. Compared to Feng Chun, the most dazzling people from Shengyuan Academy were the other two. The young man in blood-red armor was also a young marquis named Emo Langia. There was also a young girl wearing a golden robe, looking extraordinarily luxurious and exuding a noble aura. Like Prince Yuan Yi, she was born from the Empress and was doted on by the primitive emperor. She was called Princess Yuan Shi. Feng Chen, is that Yi Guchen really that powerful? How could he injure royal brother like that? Princess Yuan Shi raised her delicate palm, which was smeared with expensive perfume. Your Highness, that is indeed the case. Feng Chen's eyes were still filled with fear. It was because he would never forget the destructive thunder tide caused by the collision of the strange thunder. Ah, Feng Chen, you are really regressing the more you cultivate. As the young marquis, you are afraid of this and that. If it were me, even if Yi Guqin appeared in front of me right now, I would be able to suppress him directly. Mo Langia snorted disdainfully. It's easy for you to say that. If you had experienced the Void Sword realm, I'm afraid you wouldn't say that, Feng Chen retorted. Humph, don't try to scare me with the story of killing 100 people with one strike. Don't you know that it's just a rumor? Who would believe it? Is that sword master a divine palace expert? Mo Langia shook his head. To be honest, I don't believe it either. But no matter what, sword master is dead. I wanted to avenge royal brother with my own hands. Princess Yuan, she said casually. It was as if sword master was just a small character to her that she could deal with easily. Alas, the ignorant are fearless. Feng Chen sighed inwardly, and did not say anything more. One would never know without witnessing it with their own eyes. How terrifying was Sword Master, who had emerged from the Azura Blood Sea. As time passed, 6 of the 7 major forces had arrived. Only the Sword Sect's Tower Forest was left. Whispers could be heard throughout the entire martial arts arena. Humph, it's such an important exchange, but Sword Sect Talon doesn't care about it at all. They're just a bunch of mobs. Xian Tai snorted coldly, his voice echoing throughout the arena. Everyone in the arena was not surprised by Xian Tai's mocking words. The Limitless Sword Sect and Sword Sect Talon had an irreconcilable enmity. It was normal for Xian Tai to have such an attitude. Yes, that's true. Sword Sect Talon doesn't care about the barbarian race at all. It's a disgrace for such an irresponsible force to stand side by side with us. The Flame Emperor said unhappily. Oh. Many people were surprised by the Flame Emperor's words. The 3 imperial palaces and Sword Sect Talon did not have any great enmity. Sword Sect Talon has gone overboard. Grandmother Shichuan of Consonant's Divine Palace said indifferently. Sword Sect Talon should be taught a lesson. Hun Tianho said coldly. Hua. The arena was in an uproar. The divine dwelling experts of 4 of the 7 great forces had spoken one after another, expressing their hostility towards Sword Sect Talon. Everyone knew about the enmity between the Limitless Sword Sect and Sword Sect Talon, but the other great forces did not have any great enmity with them. Could it be because of the Void Sword domain? Some people immediately thought. Apart from Sword Sect Talon, 9 Profound Sect, and some disciples of Consonant's Divine Palace, the Void Sword domain had suffered heavy casualties. The other great forces had suffered heavy losses. It was normal for them to be hostile towards Sword Sect Talon because of this. After all, those who had died were elite disciples who would become pillars in the future. As for the 9 Profound Sect, they had a good relationship with Sword Sect Talon, so Vice Sect Master Qingyang naturally would not say anything. What surprised everyone was that the saber-conferred king did not say anything. Yu Bufan's face was calm, but a complicated look flashed in his eyes. Although he and Feng Manlu were fated rivals, they still appreciated each other's talents. Thus, at this moment, Yu Bufan maintained his silence and did not say anything. It was at this moment that Sword Sect Talon's group finally arrived. The leader of the group was a handsome man in plain clothes. He was none other than Feng Manlu. It's the Lightless Sword King, Feng Manlu. He's the one leading the group this time. I thought it would be the Great Elder. Feng Manlu's arrival caused quite a commotion. After all, he was once a famous sword king in the Saint Origin dynasty. After going into seclusion, he rarely appeared in front of the public. The last time he appeared was in the Tianhuang Plains. You're really here? Yu Bufan's gaze instantly fell on Feng Manlu. Although Feng Manlu was blind, he could also feel Yu Bufan's gaze. 10 years ago, after the battle at the Forbidden City Summit, the two had rarely seen each other, and had never fought. This time, whether it was Feng Manlu or Yu Bufan, they both knew in their hearts. After the exchange, it was time for them to announce the identity of the successor of the Forbidden City's Battle of the Summit. Yu Bufan's successor was undoubtedly the Saber Maniac Prime Sovereign. What Yu Bufan was curious about was who Feng Manlu would choose to be his successor after Sword Sect Master's death. Chapter 412. The arrival of the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest did not ease the atmosphere in the arena. Instead, it made the atmosphere even more treacherous. However, Feng Manlu did not seem to notice as he led the elders and disciples of the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest to the spectator stand. Behind Feng Manlu were Yan Wushuang, Bai Zichen, Wang Xiaotian, Ji Ling, Chu Qingqi, Yi Xie, Yuan Mie, and the others. However, Chu Qingqi, Yi Xie, Ji Ling, and the others all had a trace of anxiety in their eyes. The outside world thought that Yi Guqin was dead, but they all knew that Yi Guqin was actually still alive. Not only was he alive, but his strength was also far greater than before. He was almost the strongest among the younger generation of the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest. Previously, there was news from the sect that Brother Yi had already left the pagoda. Why didn't he come here in time? Chu Qingqi lowered his voice and asked, "If Brother Yi can't make it in time, it'll be bad. I'm afraid I can't do anything by myself." Ji Ling's beautiful eyes were filled with worry. Although they were not weak, those who could really rank among the top in the exchange were the top geniuses such as Xian Hao, Zhou Tong, LV Qinghan, Demonic Blade Lung Ju, and the others. Ji Ling, Wang Xiaotian, and the others were slightly weaker. Even Bai Zichen could barely do it. The reason why the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest was the last to arrive was because they wanted to wait for Yi Guqin. However, Yi Guqin did not appear, which made the group of inner court disciples slightly disappointed. Even Elder Qing He and the other elders were frowning. If they ranked last again in this exchange, it was very likely that they would be selected to fight against the Fire Tribe, Thunder Tribe, and other powerful barbarian tribes. At that time, there would be heavy casualties. This was what the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest wanted to see the most. Is Yi Guqin avoiding the battle because he's afraid? Wang Xiaotian said casually. He was met with the stern gazes of many inner court disciples, and even a few elders. I was just saying. Wang Xiaotian was sweating from the stares. At the same time, he couldn't help but sigh inwardly. Back then, his reputation in the inner court wasn't inferior to Yi Guqin's in the slightest. But now his casual questioning of Yi Guqin was met with a wave of objections. This obviously showed exactly how great Yi Guqin's reputation in the inner court was. Bai Zichen, who was silently watching from the side, clenched his fists tightly. A strong sense of unwillingness surged in his heart. Bai Zichen, who had once been second only to Yan Wushuang, was now like an outsider in the inner court. No one cared about him at all. Yi Guqin, you mustn't come. At this exchange, I, Bai Zichen, will do my best to turn the tides. Bai Zichen swore in his heart. As long as he performed amazingly in this exchange, his reputation in the inner court would definitely rise again. Even Yan Wushuang might change her opinion of him. At this moment, Yan Wushuang saw that the surrounding disciples of the inner yard were all lifeless. Her gaze was incomparably complicated. Before Yi Guqin came to the Sword Sect's Pagoda Forest, she was the goal and faith of all the disciples of the inner yard. As long as Yan Wushuang was around, the disciples of the inner yard would be filled with confidence. But now, only Yi Guqin didn't come. Most of the disciples of the inner yard looked as if they had lost their backbone and were in low spirits. Yi Guqin, I, Yan Wushuang, won't admit defeat. Yan Wushuang bit her lips slightly. She had indeed lost to Yi Guqin and lost the opportunity to become the successor of Wind-Sweeping Pavilion. However, she didn't want to lose to Yi Guqin forever. And this exchange was the best opportunity for Yan Wushuang to perform. Like Bai Zichen, she wanted to rely on herself to turn the tides and rebuild her reputation. Wind-Sweeping Pavilion, your Sword Sect's Pagoda Forest is really arrogant, Xian Tai said coldly. I feel that the Sword Sect's Pagoda Forest's attitude isn't right. Why don't we just let them be the last? Yan Emperor said with a vengeful tone. In his eyes, although Yi Guqin was dead, the hatred in his heart couldn't be resolved. Therefore, he vented his anger on the Sword Sect's Pagoda Forest. I agree, Grandma Shichuan echoed. These words caused an uproar in the entire martial arts arena. If that was the case, the Sword Sect's Pagoda Forest wouldn't need to participate in the competition. They could just wait for the results. In the face of the sharp words of the divine-dwelling experts, Feng Manlu's expression remained as calm as water. Everyone, let's take a step back and start the exchange, Feng Manlu said. Feng Manlu, what kind of attitude is this? How dare a spirit bridge expert speak to us divine-dwelling experts in such a tone? Hun Tianho said coldly. The Saint Origin Academy had also suffered heavy losses in the Void Sword realm. Feng Manlu clasped his hands behind his back, his originally gentle expression slowly receding. Although he was dressed simply, his aura was as unfathomable as the ocean. In my opinion, the divine dwelling stage is just SOSO. His words caused the entire noisy martial arts arena to instantly fall into a frozen deathly silence. The divine dwelling stage is just SOSO. Oh, Feng Manlu, it seems that you still have a lot of complaints after falling from the divine dwelling stage. Xian Tai laughed loudly as if he had heard the funniest joke in the world. He wasn't the only one. The Flame Emperor, Grandma Shichuan, Hun Tianho, and the other divine-dwelling experts also laughed. They weren't angry. They only felt that it was ridiculous. There were only 2 divine-dwelling experts present who didn't laugh. One was Sect Master Qin Yang of the 9 Profound Sect, and the other was Yu Bufan. He and Feng Manlu were the most familiar opponents. Yu Bufan also knew that Feng Manlu never boasted. Forget it. Let's start the exchange. Don't let the younger generation wait, said Sect Master Qin Yang. Let's start, said Yu Bufan. I'll let it go this time out of respect for Sect Master Qin Yang, and Hall Master Yu. Feng Manlu, watch your words and actions in the future. Xian Tai flicked his sleeve and spoke as if he was instructing the younger generation. He knew that he was strong enough to crush Feng Manlu after breaking through to the divine dwelling stage. Damn it. The group of Inner Academy disciples were incomparably furious. Forget it. Let's start. Feng Manlu was gentle and didn't care. With the gathering of the 7 great forces, the exchange officially began. Each great force would send out their top disciples. This was because this exchange would decide who the 7 major forces would be facing. None of the forces wanted to suffer heavy losses. Therefore, they all wanted to be the champion and obtain the right to choose their battle zone. Even if they couldn't be the champion, they didn't want to be the last. This was because the last place was destined to face the Fire Clan, the Lightning Clan, and the other powerful barbarian clans. Disciples of the great forces, enter the arena, said an old man who was in charge of the exchange. Some people from the 7 great forces entered the arena, but there weren't many of them. This was because a top heaven pride could defeat more than 10 ordinary geniuses. Therefore, the number of people was meaningless. Only strength was meaningful. Go, said Feng Manlu indifferently. Yan Wushuang, Bai Zichen, Wang Xiaotian, Jiling, and Yuan Mie stood up. Other than Yi Guchen, Yan Wushuang and the others were ranked the highest. Yuan Mie had also entered the top 10 in the inner courtyard ranking battle. Moreover, he possessed darkness sword intent, and was stronger than ordinary heaven prides. Therefore he also had to participate. Looking at the 5 people who stood up and walked to the center of the arena, the other inner courtyard disciples broke out in cold sweat. Would they still be able to win without Yi Guchen? Chapter 413. The chosen disciples of the 7 forces walked to the center of the arena. The pyramid-shaped trapezoidal building was the focus of everyone's attention. The entire building, from top to bottom, had a total of 7 distinct platforms. The only thing the top prodigies of the 7 forces needed to do was to occupy the platforms they were on and challenge the top at the same time. There were no one-on-one rules in such a competition. They could attack together or individually. However, the top prodigies who could participate in the exchange were all proud and arrogant people. How could they team up with others? Hence, most of the time, it was one-on-one. This was also a competition between the prodigies of the various sections. Everyone, I'm sure most of you know the rules of the exchange. There are 7 platforms from the top to the bottom of the pyramid. In the end, whichever force's disciple can occupy the platform at the top of the pyramid will be the first, followed by the second and third. The elder in charge of the competition explained. The showdown between the prodigies of the seven forces officially begins. Following the elder's shout, the entire arena was instantly stirred up by a storm. It was a storm caused by the true chi of the various forces' disciples. I, Xianhao, will take the first place. Xianhao put his hands behind his back and took a step forward. His figure flashed out instantly. I, Zhou Tong, will definitely be in the top 3 this time. Zhou Tong was dressed in white and held a folding fan in his hand. It's a pity that Yi Guqin is dead. My saber can't find an opponent. Lung Ju held the demonic saber in his hand. His gaze was cold as he shook his head and sighed. The top prodigies of the various forces all shot towards the top of the pyramid like arrows leaving the bow. No one was willing to give up the first place right from the start. Hence, at this moment, the prodigies of the seven forces were all aiming for the first place at the top of the pyramid. Boom. Li Hao, we haven't decided who won the other day. Let's fight again today. Feng Ping, I'll avenge my previous humiliation at this exchange. Soon, the prodigies of the seven forces were engaged in a chaotic battle. The seven forces had complicated relationships with each other and were entangled with grudges. There was naturally a lot of friction between them. This exchange, which was the focus of everyone's attention, was the best platform to settle their grudges. Although there was a rule in the exchange meeting that forbade anyone from killing them, Yi Zichen didn't want to kill them. However, the feeling of being able to defeat their enemies and trample them beneath their feet, and being the focus of everyone's attention, still made every single one of the geniuses unleash their full strength and unleash their brilliance. I, Yin Wushuang, aim to come first. No one can stop me. Yin Wushuang held a sword in her hand and wore an ice silk skirt armor. Her phoenix brows were raised, and her delicate and pretty face carried a valiant and heroic bearing. Yin Wushuang, who had comprehended the wind sword essence, had also left her name on the sword-seeking steel. She was a top genius of the sword sect Pagoda Forest. Although she had lost to Yi Guqin in a single strike, it did not mean that she was weak. It was because Yi Guqin was too strong. Besides that, the pathos of the heavens had shaken Yin Wushuang's mind, and that was why she'd lost. Therefore, Yin Wushuang's strength was actually not weak. Yin Wushuang, you had better stay behind. The first place is destined to be our limitless sword sect. The 2 elite sky prides of the Sun Moon Hall from the limitless sword sect stepped forward to stop Yin Wushuang. You can't stop me. Yin Wushuang's eyes were cold. Although the 2 sky prides of the Sun Moon Hall were strong, they were no match for her. What if we join in? 3 figures suddenly appeared. 2 men and 1 woman. They were Princess Yuanxi from the Saint Origin Academy and the 2 young marquises, Mo Lengjie and Fang Chun. The sword sect Pagoda Forest has no enmity with you. What do you want? Yin Wushuang frowned slightly. The competition between geniuses in the exchange was a free-for-all. In addition, the 7 major forces had a complicated relationship. In the past, there had never been a situation where multiple forces joined forces to deal with one force. But now, after the disciples of the Limitless Sword Sect had stepped forward to stop them, the people of the Saint Origin Academy had also stepped forward. No enmity? Ha! Who did this to my brother, who is still lying on the bed with serious injuries? Princess Yuanxi raised her sharp chin and said coldly. He reaped what he sowed. Yin Wushuang was not afraid of Princess Yuanxi at all. You. Humph. This is only secondary. After all, Yi Guqin is already dead. The one I want to teach is this bastard a lesson. Princess Yuanxi said as she looked at Yuan Mie. Yuan Mie was the most special one among the primitive emperor's sons. Yuan Mie, as a prince of the dynasty, you betrayed us by joining the sword sect Pagoda Forest. You are a disgrace to our dynasty. Mo Lengjie said disdainfully, wearing blood-red armor and holding a blood-red spear. You guys go. Leave this to me. Yuan Mie said indifferently to Yin Wushuang and the others. Then he took out his dermic pattern divine weapon Silent Night. At the same time, a ghastly and gloomy sword concept that was silent into the night silently spread out. Seeing this, the eyes of Princess Yuanxi and the others turned solemn. Yuan Mie, who had comprehended the dark sword intent, was not to be underestimated. How can you handle 3 people at the same time by yourself? Ji Ling and the others were surprised. This competition is not that simple. Yuan Mia's voice was hoarse. Without saying anything else, he attacked Princess Yuan Shi and the others with his sword. Hearing this, Yan Wushuang's face suddenly turned serious. She looked around and realized that, although most of the Sky Prides were fighting with each other, there were still some forces who had not moved. They looked at Yan Wushuang and the others with cold eyes. Finally, the three blades appeared in the sealed saber royal palace. The leader was a black-clothed youth, holding a demonic saber with demonic patterns surrounding it. His eyes were as cold as ice. Although Lung Ju's goal was to be number one, he had a grudge to settle before that. Yan Wushuang's face turned serious. Even she could not ignore Lung Ju, the leader of the three blades. In the Void Sword realm, Yi Guqin killed hundreds of people with one strike. Although I don't believe it, the lives of the disciples on the Sky Saber list will be on your heads, Lung Ju said in a low voice. Although I can't kill you in this competition, I can injure you severely so that you won't be able to be number one, Nie Ling said with a trace of hatred. Back in the Void Sword realm, he and Mo Juechen had been humiliated by Yi Guqin. Now that he had the chance, he naturally wanted to get back at them. Limitless Sword Sect, Saint Origin Academy, Sealed Saber Royal Palace. The Sky Prides of the three forces were all against the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest. This scene caused all the spectators around the fighting arena to be stunned for a moment. This kind of situation had never happened before. Why are the disciples of the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest surrounded? Is it the revenge of the other forces for what happened in the Void Sword realm? Many people guessed. In the Void Sword realm, Yi Guqin had not only killed hundreds of people with one strike, but he had also killed hundreds of disciples from the various forces with the collision of the strange lightning bolts. In everyone's eyes, Yi Guqin was already dead. However, the other forces would not let this go so easily. Chapter 414. This is too shameless. Elder Qing, he was so angry that his face turned red. The other elders, such as Gu Tua and Shi Yun, also had ugly expressions on their faces. They had never thought that the Limitless Sword Sect and the other powers would actually do such a thing. Although this action was somewhat shameful, it did not violate the rules of the exchange. Xian Tai, Hun Tianho, and the other Divine Palace experts looked at each other and smiled. Yu Bufan shook his head slightly. He did not ask Lung Ju and the others to join forces against the Sword Sect's Tower Forest. Lord Feng Manlu, what should we do? Elder Qing, he was as anxious as an ant on a hot pan. If this continued, then their Sword Sect Pagoda Forest would probably be ranked at the bottom again in this exchange. Feng Manlu did not say anything. He believed that the successor he had his eyes on would not disappoint him. In the arena, Yan Wushuang and the others were surrounded by the crowd. If you withdraw now, you can avoid physical pain, Lung Ju said as he stroked his devil saber. The disciples of the Sword Sect's Tower Forest can only die standing, not live kneeling. You want us to flee without a fight? Dream on. Yan Wushuang pointed her sword at the sky like a goddess of war. Her true qi erupted, and the wind sword intent whistled out. Boom. There was no superfluous words. Yan Wushuang and the others were determined to take first place. As for the people from the other forces, they wanted revenge. There was no way to reconcile the two. Lung Ju directly attacked. His devil saber slashed through the air, bringing with it a pitch-black saber light. Yan Wushuang's sword swept out, and the sword light whistled like a gust of wind. Their saber light and sword energy collided, and violent ripples erupted. In addition, Nie Ling, Mo Juechen, and the prodigies of the Limitless Sword Sect's Sun Moon Hall also attacked. Bai Zichen, Wang Xiaotian and Ji Ling also attacked. Although the three of them were the top prodigies of the inner court, their opponents were the prodigies of the other forces. Nie Ling and Mo Juechen's cultivation were similar to theirs, and the prodigies of the Sun Moon Hall were not weak either. As for Xian Hao and the Black and White Impermanents, they directly rushed toward the first place seat. When Chun Yi and the others of the Nine Profound Sects saw this, they wanted to help. However, the white-clothed Zhou Tong had a smile on his face as he indifferently blocked their path. Little Spirit Emperor, what are you doing? Chen Yi and Bai Yinji both frowned. Let them handle their matters. We should focus on the exchange, shouldn't we? Zhou Tong said lightly with a smile on his face. With his scheming, it was naturally impossible for him to personally deal with the sword sect's Talon. That would cause Zither Fairy's disgust. However, Zhou Tong was absolutely unwilling for others to help the sword sect's Tower Forest. Thus he stopped Chen Yi and the others. As one of the three little emperors, although Zhou Tong was good at scheming, his strength was not weak. This caused Chen Yi and the others to be unable to reinforce the sword sect's Tower Forest in time. On the other side, Zither Fairy also wanted to help, but she was stopped by Ren Tingting. Please step aside. The Zither Fairy took out her jade zither. This was the dermic pattern divine weapon that Ying Ning had given her. I won't step aside. What can you do to me? Oh right, I forgot to tell you that my master told me to teach you a lesson if possible. Consider it as payback for senior sister Pan. Ren Tingting's gaze was like a cat playing with a mouse. Her master was naturally Grandma Shichuan. Ren Tingting had been worried about not finding an opportunity to deal with Zither Fairy. Now that she had seized the opportunity, she would not miss it. Not far away, LV Qinghan frowned slightly. She wanted to step forward to stop them, but she was stopped by the other two prides of Consonant's palace. Senior sister LV, this is Grandma Shichuan's intention. Don't make things difficult for us. The two prides said coldly. Grandma Shichuan. LV Qinghan clenched her jade-like hands, her expression slightly ugly. Ever since the palace master of Consonant's palace had left for a long time, Grandma Shichuan had begun to think of ways to nurture her disciples. As for LV Qinghan and Zither Fairy, they were the palace master's subordinates. As the major factions worked together to deal with the sword sect's Tower Forest, the situation became extremely chaotic. Zither Fairy, Chen Yi, and the others wanted to help the sword sect's Tower Forest, but they were stopped by Zhou Tong, Ren Tingting, and the others. Right now, the sword sect's Tower Forest was in an extremely bad situation. Yan Wushuang was facing demonic saber Lungju alone, while Bai Zichen, Wang Xiaotian, and Ji Ling were facing off against Nieling, Emojiwechen, and the two prodigies from the Limitless Sword Sect. In terms of numbers, the Sword Sect's Tower Forest was inferior to the Limitless Sword Sect and the saber-conferred Monarch Palace. In terms of strength, they could not suppress their opponents. Under such pressure, the 5 disciples of the Sword Sect's Tower Forest were surrounded by danger. On the other side, Yuan Mie was surrounded by 3 prodigies from the 3 imperial palaces. He was also in a bad situation. His cultivation was only at the 8th transformation Divine Soul stage. Even with the help of the Dark Sword Intent, he could only fight against a prodigy at the 9th transformation Divine Soul stage. On the other hand, Princess Yuan Shi and Mo Lengia were both prodigies at the 9th transformation Divine Soul stage. Although Feng Chen was slightly weaker, he was also at the 7th transformation Divine Soul stage. Yuan Mie, I'll give you a choice now. Leave the Sword Sect's Tower Forest and join the Saint Origin Academy. That way, you won't be severely injured. Princess Yuan, she said arrogantly. In your dreams. Yuan Mie's single eye was cold and deadly. He held his sword and attacked. The sword light was as silent as the night. Bastard, you overestimate yourself. Princess Yuan, she did not hold back anymore. Mo Lengia and Feng Chen also attacked with all their strength. No matter how strong Yuan Mie was, he could not fight against the 3 of them. He kept coughing up blood and retreating. Seeing this, the people of the Sword Sect's Tower Forest were furious. Such a shameless siege was actually happening right in front of his eyes. However, in the eyes of the Limitless Sword Sect and other forces, this scene was not tragic. Xianhao looked indifferently at the people of the Sword Sect's Tower Forest and said, Xianfeng, Xiandai, and Morong Ditian, you guys attack. Morong Ditian nodded slightly. His strength had also reached the 7th transformation Divine Soul stage. Although Xianfeng and Xiandai were not happy with Xianhao, Xiantai had indeed appointed Xianhao as the leader. They could not fight with Xianhao under Xiantai's nose. You're the one who occupied the first platform, but we have to do the hard work, Xiandai said sarcastically. Sister Dai, forget it. Palace Master Xian will see our strength, Xianfeng said. They directly attacked Yan Wushuang and the others. Even the limitless sword sect's black and white impermanents are attacking. Xianfeng and Xiandai's attacks caused an uproar again. It was rumored that the two of them were telepathic. When they attacked together, their strength was even comparable to Xian Hao and other top prodigies. Their participation immediately caused the sword sect's tower forest, which was already in danger, to fall into even more danger. Murong Ditian attacked with the Mara sword in his hand. Ji Ling could not block it in time and vomited blood. Wang Xiaotian and Bai Zichen were also forced into a desperate situation. Bai Zichen suddenly unleashed his strength, which was actually close to Yan Wushuang's. However, he was suppressed by the other enemies in the blink of an eye. Damn it! Blood flowed from the corner of Bai Zichen's mouth. His expression was very ugly. To think that he had held back some of his strength. He wanted to unleash it at the crucial moment to turn the tide. However, even if he unleashed his strength now, it was useless. He was directly suppressed. We're finished this time. Wang Xiaotian's face was ashen. However, the most fatal one was Yan Wushuang. Leng Ju had already caused Yan Wushuang to not dare to be careless. Following the black and white impermanence's attacks, Yan Wushuang almost instantly fell into an extremely passive situation. She continuously retreated. Although she had the protection of the ice silk skirt, her injuries were becoming more and more serious. It could be said that the participating sword sect's Tower Forest disciples had all fallen into a hopeless situation. At the same time that the sword sect's Tower Forest disciples were in danger, Yi Guchen in the inn's forging room had finally completed the fusion and repair of the snow clay embryo. Chapter 415. In the forging room, Yi Guchen looked at the two divine weapons in front of him. The large piece of snow clay fetus had been used up and merged into the blood prison sword, and the heavenly demon general armor. Of course, the snow clay fetus alone was not enough to completely repair these two supreme-grade divine weapons. Even so, the power of these two divine weapons was far greater than before. Most of the cracks on the surface of the weapons had also healed. The snow clay fetus is indeed useful. Other than the blood spirit formation, the blood prison sword and the heavenly demon general armor can each use another formation, Yi Guchen thought. With one spiritual formation, one could be called a divine weapon. However, supreme-grade divine weapons obviously had more than one formation. After being repaired, the blood prison sword could use another formation called the splitting edge formation. The splitting edge formation could increase the sharpness of the blood prison sword. To a certain extent, it was similar to the splitting edge formation on the tribulation dust sword. As for the heavenly demon general armor, it could use a frenzy blood formation. After activating the frenzy blood formation, the heavenly demon general armor could stimulate the blood in Yi Guchen's body, allowing Yi Guchen to double his combat strength. This double combat strength was not to be underestimated. Yi Guchen's current strength was comparable to a top expert in the 9 transformations of the divine soul. After activating it, he would not be much weaker than an expert in the small hidden gate. Of course, although the frenzy blood formation's effect was strong, the amount of blood consumed was also extremely shocking. Even with Yi Guchen's current vigorous blood, he could only last for 15 minutes at most. If it lasted for too long, Yi Guchen would be in danger of running out of blood. The time taken to repair the divine weapons exceeded my expectations. Yi Guchen put the 2 divine weapons into his origin ring. Without delay, Yi Guchen got up and left. He held the bamboo hat and thought for a while. He did not wear it and put it back into his origin ring. Since he had chosen to participate in the exchange, Yi Guchen did not need to hide anymore. After today, the name of the sword sect would once again appear in the eyes of the world. The sword master, who had once killed hundreds of people with a single sword strike and caused the geniuses of the 7 major forces to tremble in fear, would return once again. Yi Guchen walked out with his hands clasped behind his back. The innkeeper at the inn's entrance was a little puzzled. Because Yi Guchen had been wearing a bamboo hat when he entered, the shopkeeper didn't recognize him at first. Yi Guchen walked in front of the shopkeeper and took out a crystal jade to pay the bill. This guest looks a little familiar. The shopkeeper sized up Yi Guchen's face. Head, is that so? Yi Guchen smiled faintly and didn't say anything else. After handing over the crystal jades, he waved his hand and left. Looking at Yi Guchen's back as he left, the shopkeeper was deep in thought. Because he did feel that the young man's face was somewhat familiar. At some point, a thought flashed through the shopkeeper's mind. He recalled that a painter had once come here, but had no money to pay the bill. In the end, he painted a portrait of the sword sect's Yi Guchen as payment. The portrait of the sword sect that the painter had drawn was exactly the same as the youth that had just left. Clatter! The crystal jade in the shopkeeper's hand slipped to the ground. His expression froze, and there was extreme shock in his eyes. I must have seen wrongly. How could it be? The shopkeeper muttered in a daze. In the arena. At this moment, the competition between the prodigies of the seven forces had reached its climax. Especially the sword sect's Tower of Lin, Yan Wushuang, and the others, who were fighting against the other forces. The surrounding spectators couldn't help but sigh. The sword sect's Tower of Lin had lost this time. Yan Wushuang was surrounded by Lung Ju, the black and white deities. Her entire body was covered in wounds, and the blood flowing from the corner of her mouth even dyed her chin red. However, Yan Wushuang still held the sword in her hand tightly, unwilling to give up. Sigh, what a pity. Without the sword sect's Tower of Lin, the sword sect's Tower of Lin is actually so weak. Xian Dai's words were filled with sarcasm. Shut up. Yan Wushuang's eyes were extremely cold as she gritted her teeth. She wasn't willing to admit that even without Yi Guchen, she still wanted to win first place. On the other side, Bai Zichen and the others were also badly suppressed. As for Yuan Mie, he was surrounded by Queen Yuan Shi and the other two. He was in an even worse state, and his black robe was soaked in blood. Even Zither Fairy, who wanted to help, was injured by Ren Tingting, and there was blood at the corner of her mouth. Although she had the ancient Zither, her cultivation wasn't particularly high. Naturally, she couldn't compare to Ren Tingting, who had a divine soul 9 transformations. Haha, Zither Fairy, don't think about getting what you don't deserve. Ren Tingting's face was cold as she attacked mercilessly. Zither Fairy was being pursued by Zhou Tong, and it made her burn with jealousy. I don't have a special relationship with young Master Zhou. Zither Fairy wiped the blood at the corner of her mouth. Humph, what kind of person is young Master Zhou? How can he be seduced by an ordinary woman? It must be you, a vixen, who used some means to attract young Master Zhou's attention, and deliberately pretended to be cold and aloof. Ren Tingting's brain circuit was clear, and she thought that Zither Fairy was playing hard to get. You. Zither Fairy bit her lips until they bled after being insulted by Ren Tingting. I'll teach you a lesson today. Stay away from young Master Zhou in the future. Ren Tingting's attack was ruthless, causing Zither Fairy to be heavily injured. Although LV Qinghan wanted to help, she was stopped and couldn't. It could be said that up until now, whether it was Yan Wushuang's group or Zither Fairy's group who wanted to help, the situation was very bad. It was very miserable. Sigh. The Sword Sect Pagoda Forest was gloomy. Chu Qingqi, Yixia, and the others also sighed. Only Feng Manlu had a calm expression, and only maintained his silence. At this moment, the situation in the arena changed again. That Bai Zichen actually directly left the pyramid and flew toward the outer perimeter. This sudden scene caused all the spectators around the fighting arena to reveal expressions of surprise. Could it be that someone from the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest was going to leave? This was something that had never happened in the past social gatherings. Bai Zichen, what are you doing? Yan Wushuang, who was fighting a bloody battle, shouted angrily. She was incomparably furious. Bai Zichen's expression was uncertain, but he didn't reply. At this moment he was already injured. If he continued, he would definitely be heavily injured. Knowing that it was already impossible to obtain first place, even if he continued, it would be futile. Therefore, Bai Zichen decided to withdraw. Wang Xiaotian, why aren't you leaving? Bai Zichen actually turned around and shouted. He wasn't willing to withdraw alone. It would be too conspicuous. He had to pull someone along. Wang Xiaotian was also heavily injured. He slightly clenched his teeth and revealed a hesitant expression. But in the end he still retreated to the outside like Zichen. This scene caused an uproar in the surroundings. A genius disciple of a major faction had actually withdrawn one after another. This was absolutely an unerasable humiliation. Yan Wushuang was so angry that her liver and gallbladder were about to burst. Her delicate face was scarlet red from anger. As for the remaining people, only Ji Ling and Yuan Mia were left. Yuan Mia was already on the verge of despair. Although Ji Ling was a woman, she didn't withdraw and bitterly persisted. Whoosh! A sword suddenly stabbed out from behind Ji Ling. It was Morong Ditian. The Mara sword directly pierced through Ji Ling's shoulder. Nie Ling and Mo Juechen immediately attacked. Swordlight split the sky and fiercely bombarded Ji Ling's body. With a poochie sound, she vomited a large mouthful of blood. Her body was covered in hideous wounds. She fell into a pool of blood with a plop, sound like a falling swan. According to the rules of the exchange, no one was allowed to take another's life. Thus, Ji Ling still had a breath left in her, but she was heavily injured and unconscious. Ji Ling! Yan Wushuang cried out in grief. She, who had always been as resolute as a man, had tears welling up in her eyes at this moment. Bastard! The eyes of all the disciples of the Sword Sect's pagoda were blood red, and the veins on their foreheads were bulging. They were cursing those who had surrounded and attacked Ji Ling. They were also cursing Bai Zichen and Wang Xiaotian. The two of them, dignified men, were actually inferior to a woman like Ji Ling. Ji Ling would rather die than retreat. She fell into a pool of blood, while they fled outside the arena. Senior brother Bai, did we do something wrong? Wang Xiaotian felt the fury of the disciples of the Sword Sect's pagoda, and asked nervously, "What's wrong? The outcome has already been decided. Could it be that we're still going to endure with heavy injuries?" Bai Zichen said as if it was a matter of course. It was also at this moment that Yan Wushuang was momentarily distracted because of Ji Ling. When Leng Ju saw this, he directly took the opportunity to charge forward and break through Yan Wushuang's defense. As for Xian Feng and Xian Dai, their hearts were connected. How could they miss this opportunity? They directly attacked Yan Wushuang with their swords. If this sword strike hit, even Yan Wushuang would be completely injured and unable to fight anymore. However, Leng Ju's previous attack had already caused Yan Wushuang to reveal a flaw. She could not avoid this attack of the black and white impermanence. Is this the end? Yan Wushuang's mouth revealed a trace of bitterness. It turned out that with her strength alone, she was still unable to turn the tide. The disciples of the Sword Sect's pagoda could not bear to see this scene. They all lowered their heads and were dejected. Their Sword Sect's pagoda had never been humiliated, and in such a sorry state. However, at this critical moment, the world seemed to have fallen into a deathly silence. A green sword river traversed the sky, vast and mighty, like an azure dragon of the 9 heavens. It was 30,000 heaven-splitter sword souls. They split the heavens and the earth and shook the world. Chapter 416. In the arena, Yan Wushuang and the others were on the verge of collapsing. If even Yan Wushuang fell, the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest would have no chance of turning the tables. Yan Wushuang could even see the disdainful sneers on Xian Feng and Xian Dai's faces. This time, the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest had lost miserably. Even a woman as determined as Yan Wushuang felt a crack in her heart. As for Qing He and the other elders, as well as Chu Qingqi and the other inner court disciples, they all looked gloomy. On the other hand, the elders and disciples of the Limitless Sword Sect all had smiles on their faces. It was as if they could already see the tragic end of the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest. Xian Tai, Grandma Shichuan, and the others could not help but smile. They believed that the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest's fate was sealed. Who would be able to turn the tide? However, at this critical juncture, a whistling sound came from the distance. This sound was like a dragon's roar that shook the entire arena. What? What's that? Many people noticed the cyan-colored torrent that streaked across the sky. It wasn't an azure dragon, but a torrential tide formed by 30,000 azure sword souls. That's When the disciples of the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest saw this, their expressions froze. Then a look of ecstasy appeared in their eyes. He had come. The dream and belief of all the inner court disciples of the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest had come. Even Elder Qing He and the others could not hide their excitement. Their clenched fists trembled slightly. The corners of Feng Manla's mouth curled up into a smile, as if he had been relieved of a heavy burden. He knew that the successor he had chosen would not disappoint him. What's that? At this moment, whether it was the spectators or the sky prides in the arena, they were all shocked by this sudden scene. 30,000 sword souls streaked across the sky. This scene was truly shocking. Someone's in there. Suddenly, a sky pride seemed to have seen something. He pointed at the green torrent of sword souls and could not help but exclaim. A figure with a pair of fiery wings could be seen in the green torrent. Boom, boom, boom. The terrifying 30,000 sword souls charged toward Yan Wushuang to block the attacks of the black and white impermanents, Lung Ju, and the others. Then, a figure with fiery wings on his back flashed forward. He grabbed Yan Wushuang's slender waist and retreated to avoid the true energy ripples caused by the collision. When Yan Wushuang saw who it was, a complicated look appeared in her eyes. At the same time, when she felt her waist being hugged, a faint blush appeared on her usually cold and indifferent face. At the same time, a sense of shame spread in her heart. In the end, was he still the one who could turn the tide? Yan Wushuang's eyes faces of the swords SSSSS of the swords Switzes SSS. The esthus was thus, the S of the being of. When the dust settled, a thin figure in a black robe stood upright like a sword that reached the heavens. He had sharp eyebrows and bright eyes. He was extraordinarily handsome, but his eyes were still. A person who shouldn't have appeared in this place. It was impossible for him to appear here alive. Appeared. The thousands of spectators around the arena, including the 7 major forces, Gongsun family, Shinta family, and the geniuses who were fighting in the arena, stopped their attacks and stared blankly at the young man who had suddenly appeared. Many people couldn't forget that face. Nie Ling, Mo Juechen, Shinta Miao, Feng Chen, and the other geniuses who had escaped from the Void Sword realm looked at Yi Guchen. Their faces froze almost instantly, as if they were frozen. As for Xian Hao, he almost couldn't hold it in. His was a little chaotic. He stared at the young man who had appeared. What's wrong with you? Princess Yuan Shi and Mo Lengjie frowned as they looked at Feng Chen, whose face had suddenly turned pale. Yi. Feng Chen's voice trembled slightly. He thought of the Void Sword realm again. The young man had stepped on the Azura Blood Sea and killed hundreds of people with his sword. That destructive lightning tide had directly taken the lives of hundreds of elite disciples. And Princess Yuan Shi frowned slightly. She felt that Feng Chen had become stupid. Impossible. This is absolutely impossible. Xian Tai's gaze was fixed on Yi Guchen. Almost everyone who knew Yi Guchen couldn't believe their eyes. On the other side, Chen Yi, Bai Yanji, and the others were also stunned. Immediately, they were overjoyed. As for Zither Fairy, it was as if she had been struck by lightning. Although she was severely injured, she didn't seem to feel it. Her entire mind, her entire vision, was filled with that figure. Lord Yi! Zither Fairy cried tears of joy. Even all the pain in her body seemed to have disappeared. Senior Brother Yi. Senior Brother Yi Guchen. On the side of the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest, all the inner yard disciples roared like crazy. Some even shed tears of excitement. Even people like Chu Qingqi and Yi Xie, who were calm, had tears in their eyes at this moment. Even Qing He and the other elders were so excited that they couldn't control themselves. Gu Tuo's face also showed a complicated expression. When the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest was in a desperate situation, the last person to appear was still that figure. The crazy shouts of the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest disciples were like a torrent, spreading throughout the entire gladiator arena. What? Did I hear wrong? Yi Guchen? Is it that Yi Guchen? How is it possible? Didn't he die in the Void Sword realm? How can he still be alive? Looking at the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest's attitude, that young man is Yi Guchen. It's incredible that he's still alive. The entire gladiator arena was in an uproar like never before. The noise rose to the sky. Is that Yi Guqin from the sword sect? He's so handsome, Gongsun Xiaoye exclaimed. However, the faces of the people from the other forces were not looking good. Xian Tai, Grandma Shichuan, the Flame Emperor, Hun Tianho and the others all had gloomy expressions. Although they didn't know how Yi Guqin had survived, what they saw was what they saw. However, seeing was believing. Yi Guqin had appeared in front of them alive. This was an irrefutable fact. Can anyone tell me why he's still alive? Grandma Shichuan's old face was cold. He's really tough. Xian Tai sighed. Heh, it's good that he's still alive. It's time to avenge my disciple. The Flame Emperor's eyes were incomparably cold. Clearly, Yi Guqin's arrival had made some people excited. However, most of them were looking at him with hatred. After all, Yi Guqin's actions in the Void Sword realm had offended too many people. Yi Guqin let go of Yan Wushuang's waist and swept his gaze across the gladiator arena. Ji Ling was lying in a pool of blood. His Yuan Mie was severely injured and on the verge of death. Yan Wushuang's eyes were red. She gritted her teeth and said, "The Limitless Sword Sect and the other forces are shameless. They joined forces to deal with the Sword Sect's pagoda forest." Yan Wushuang's voice was choked with sobs. Meanwhile, at the Sword Sect's forest of pagodas, an inner court disciple was unable to restrain the grief and indignation in his heart any longer. And he actually knelt on one knee with a bang before cupping his fists towards Yi Guqin, and shouting in a clear voice, "Senior brother Yi, please draw the sword for our Sword Sect's pagoda forest." Shortly after, another inner court disciple knelt on one knee with red eyes. "Senior brother Yi, please draw the sword for our Sword Sect's pagoda forest." Like a chain reaction, all of the inner court disciples, including Chu Qingqi, Yi Xie, and the others, dropped to one knee in unison and exclaimed loudly, "Let's go!" Elder Qing he sighed softly and cupped his fists at Yi Guqin as well. "Yi Guqin, please draw the sword for our Sword Sect's pagoda forest." Subsequently, Shi Yin and the other elders, including Gu Tuo, who had a grudge against Yi Guqin, sighed and cupped their fists with a complicated expression. However, the most shocking thing was that Feng Manlu, who had his hands behind his back, also cupped his fists towards Yi Guqin. "Yi Guqin, please draw the sword for our Sword Sect's pagoda forest." Boom. All the inner court disciples from the Sword Sect's pagoda forest, including Feng Manlu, shouted in unison. Their voices pierced through the clouds and shook the heavens and earth. "Please draw the sword for our Sword Sect's pagoda forest." Chapter 417. All the disciples in the Sword Sect pagoda clenched their teeth and suppressed the grief and indignation in their hearts. The Limitless Sword Sect and other forces had shamelessly besieged them. Bai Zichen, Wang Xiaotian, and the others had retreated in humiliation. Ji Ling, Yuan Mie, and the others had fought a bloody battle, but were still heavily injured in the end. All the grievances and humiliation from before seemed to have been released at this moment. All the inner court disciples roared with all their might as they looked at Yi Guqin. No matter how calm Yan Wushuang's temperament was, she could no longer hold back as tears fell from her eyes when she felt the loud roars that could topple mountains and overturn seas. This young girl who had always been as arrogant as a phoenix actually knelt on one knee in front of Yi Guqin with a plop. "Yi Guqin, I'm sorry for what I've done to you before. But now I beg you." Yan Wushuang paused as she looked firmly at Yi Guqin with her red eyes. "Please draw your sword for our Sword Sect pagoda." All the shouts entered Yi Guqin's ears. He could feel the anger and humiliation of everyone in the Sword Sect pagoda. This was their roar from the bottom of their hearts. Yi Guqin looked at the young girl kneeling in front of him and nodded slightly. "Got it." Yi Guqin swung his hand, and the Xianming heavy sword appeared in the air. Boom. The heavy sword smashed into the ground and sank deep into it as cracks spread out around it. The entire arena seemed to shake for a moment. For some reason, all the geniuses present felt that a shocking scene was about to happen. Seeing Yi Guqin take out the Xianming heavy sword, all the disciples of the Sword Sect pagoda cried tears of joy as the blood in their bodies surged. "Since I'm here today, we'll talk about the grudges from before after the exchange. But now I want to seek justice for the Sword Sect pagoda." Yi Guchen shouted loudly and his voice spread throughout the entire arena. All the disciples of the Sword Sect Pagoda were agitated and shed tears of excitement. In the end, Yi Guchen was the only one who could clear the name of the Sword Sect's tower. Today the Sword Sect's Yi Guchen is here. With a sword in hand, I will fight a bloody battle. I won't let anyone who attacks the Sword Sect's tower go. As soon as Yi Guchen finished speaking, he held the Netherreason broadsword and directly attacked. Heh, Yi Guchen, you are indeed as arrogant as the rumors say. You overestimate yourself. Today let my demonic saber deal with you. Seeing this, Lung Ju also wielded his demonic saber and attacked. Yi Guchen, anyone can talk big. You were crippled before, so even if you survived, how much strength do you still have? Xian Dai coldly smiled. She and Xian Feng looked at each other, and very tacitly attacked Yi Guchen. Did anyone in the martial arts arena see this? They were all watching the battle closely. This was because they knew that Yi Guchen was crippled. The reason why he could kill so many people in the Void Sword realm was because of the collision between the Mad Demon Burning Blood Elixir and the Exotic Thunder. However, now even if Yi Guchen survived, how much strength could he have? This was the focus of everyone's attention. Previously, Yan Wushuang was in such a difficult situation under the siege of the three people. How much better would Yi Guchen be? Let me help you. Yan Wushuang was about to attack. You take care of Ji Ling and the others. Leave this to me. Yi Guchen's eyes were cold. Arrogant. Regardless of whether it was Lung Ju or the black and white impermanence, when they heard Yi Guchen's words, they all shouted coldly. In their opinion, Yi Guchen was overestimating himself. Yi Guchen did not say much and directly used the soul-devouring secret skill. Boom. A roar came from Yi Guchen's body. The surrounding spiritual qi of heaven and earth gathered in Yi Guchen's body like rivers returning to the sea. Meanwhile, Yi Guchen's aura was also rising steadily. 7th transformation of the Divine Soul. 8th transformation of the Divine Soul. 9th transformation of the Divine Soul. Yi Guchen's aura had reached the peak of the 9th transformation of the Divine Soul. The abundant power in his body also made Yi Guchen's aura even stronger. Feeling the terrifying fluctuation of genuine qi, everyone in the fighting arena was in an uproar. Their eyes were filled with astonishment. Didn't they say that Yi Guchen's genuine qi was crippled, and that he could only use the Mad Demon Burning Blood Elixir to explode with such combat strength? How does this look like a crippled genuine qi? It's even more vigorous than a genius with a 9th transformation of the Divine Soul. Yi Guchen's aura at this moment shocked everyone. Xian Tai and the others narrowed their eyes. They originally wanted to kill Yi Guchen. Now that Yi Guchen's genuine qi had recovered again, the killing intent in their hearts was even stronger. Xian Hao stood at the top of the pyramid building. He looked at Yi Guchen with a hint of astonishment. He did not understand how Yi Guchen had escaped that death. Not only did he survive, but his genuine qi strength had also recovered. Facing the shocked gazes of the crowd, Yi Guchen did not pay attention to them. There was only one thing he needed to do now, and that was to use the sword in his hand to seek justice for the people of the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest. Yi Guchen slashed out with his sword, and a terrifying sword wave spread out in all directions. Void Sword Technique, 1,000 waves. This terrifying sword wave spread out. Seeing this, Lung Ju poured his genuine qi into the demonic saber. A cold saber qi shot out. On the other side, Xian Feng and Xian Dai attacked at the same time. Their sword momentum actually merged together. This was actually a set of sword techniques for two people to attack together. Facing the attacks of Lung Ju and the black and white deities, Yi Guchen did not have the slightest fear in his eyes. Today he could not retreat. Taking a step back would be a blow to all the disciples of the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest. Therefore Yi Guchen had to win. Even if he had to spill his blood, he had to get first place. This was what Yi Guchen should do as a disciple of the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest. Boom. When the moves collided, a terrifying shockwave spread out. The remaining two prodigies of the Limitless Sword Sect joined forces and attacked from both sides. As for Murong Ditian, who had used the Mara sword to sneak attack Ji Ling, his eyes flickered. He did not rush forward immediately. Because he had experienced it before, he knew how terrifying Yi Guqin was. Boom. Lung Ju and the black and white deities both retreated. On the other hand, Yi Guqin did not retreat at all. Again, Yi Guqin comprehended the true essence of the edgeless sword intent. Although he had not completely comprehended the edgeless sword intent, he had already reached the entry level, and could use it to increase the power of the void sword art. At this moment, Yi Guqin's sword aura seemed to resonate with the void. The cheers of the disciples of the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest could still be heard. At this moment, Yi Guqin seemed to have fallen into a state of epiphany. Ha, Yi Guqin, are you courting death? Seeing this, Lung Ju sneered. His demonic saber tore through the void again. The black and white deities also attacked at the same time. The two of them cooperated seamlessly. Two streaks of black and white sword chi shot out horizontally. Yi Guqin's eyes were calm. Only extreme pressure could bring about extreme breakthroughs. Crack! The sound of glass breaking could be heard in Yi Guqin's mind. At this moment, his void sword art had reached the highest level, the transformative stage. Void sword art, void 10,000 waves. Compared to before, a transparent sword wave that was 1,000 times more vigorous spread out from the Xianming heavy sword. It was as if it was going to break the void. The ferocious sword wave caused the void to tremble, and the entire arena to tremble. With one sword, heaven and earth shook and the heavens were intimidated. Chapter 418. The ferocious sword wave seemed as though it was going to cause the void to boil. That powerful transparent wave with a strong vibrating force was like a broken dam, pouring out in all directions with a loud bang. It wasn't just Lung Ju, the black and white depermanents, the two sky prides from the Limitless Sword Sect, and Murong Ditian were all affected. Devil Saber 8 slashes, splitting the earth with a saber. When Lung Ju saw Yi Guqin's attack, his expression changed. Even though he was the head of the 3 sabers of the sealed Saber Monarch Hall, he still felt an immense pressure. He held the Devil Saber in his hand and slashed down. The ground cracked as the ferocious saber chi plowed out a deep crack. On the other side, Xianfeng and Xiandai were also shocked by Yi Guqin's sword move. They unleashed all of their genuine chi, and performed their most powerful sword moves. Scarlet Sun Sword Art. Yin Wen Sword Art. Xianfeng and Xiandai executed their Extreme Yang and Extreme Yin sword moves respectively. On Xianfeng's sword, blazing sword radiance spread out like the sun. On the other hand, Xiandai's sword radiated an extremely cold sword chi. Everywhere it passed, the void would be filled with frost. However, the most peculiar thing was that the two sword moves with different attributes merged together in the end. They formed a combination, and their power multiplied. The other two sky prides from the Limitless Sword Sect and Murong Ditian executed their powerful sword moves to defend against Yi Guqin's attack. Yi Guqin's myriad void ripple was extremely powerful. It was the ultimate move of a spirit-grade sword art, and wasn't to be underestimated. Boom. When the various sword moves clashed together, shocking ripples exploded out. The ferocious aftershock spread across the entire arena. If it wasn't for the huge defensive array engraved under the arena, this attack would have turned the entire arena into a mess. PFFF. The two sky prides from the Limitless Sword Sect's Sun Moon Hall were sent flying while vomiting blood. They couldn't defend against Yi Guqin's myriad void ripple. Murong Ditian also continuously retreated as blood flowed out from the corner of his mouth. Lung Ju, as well as the black and white deities, were also hit by this powerful shockwave. They retreated rapidly, groaning in their chests. They felt that their internal organs were trembling violently, as if they had been displaced. On the other hand, Yi Guqin endured the attacks of many people. Although there was a trace of blood at the corner of his mouth, he did not retreat a single step. Because Yi Guqin had already made up his mind. Not only did he want to win, he wanted to win beautifully. Yi Guqin's attitude was that he would not take a step back. Yi Guqin held the Xianming heavy sword in his hand. His eyes were filled with the vicissitudes of life, and the blood that had lain dormant for a long time. It was a complete uproar. If life is a game of chess, I am willing to be a pawn. In the vast sea of people, who has seen me take a step back? Yi Guchen spoke softly. His voice was not loud, but it seemed to reach the ears of everyone in the arena. When everyone heard Yi Guchen's words, they clenched their fists tightly. They felt the blood in their bodies expand, and hot blood rushed to their heads. Life is like the sword sect, and one sword will sweep away all injustice. So handsome. When Gongsun Xiaoye and some other girls saw the current Yi Guchen, it was as if they were looking at a fool. Under the pressure of Xiantai's divine dwelling realm experts, under the pressure of so many powerful enemies, only Yi Guchen could still speak so boldly. This was not arrogance, but an unyielding pride that belonged only to the sword sect. You are too arrogant. Lung Ju's expression was somewhat ugly. He had previously said that Yi Guchen was still alive and would become a ghost under his blade. In the end, he, the black and white deities, and the other geniuses had joined forces, but they were still unable to suppress Yi Guchen. They could not even make him retreat. Yi Guchen, you are indeed arrogant. I don't believe that you won't even take a step back today. Xian Feng wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth and drew his sword again. Xian Dai and Xian Feng's hearts were connected. They drew their swords at the same time. Their swords complemented each other and were extremely powerful. Demonic Blade Lung Ju also drew his sword again. Demonic Blade 8 slashes, second slash mountain. Two vigorous and sharp blade lights swept across the sky. In addition, Murong Ditian and the other two geniuses of the Limitless Sword Sect also attacked at the same time. So many geniuses attacked at the same time. Their goal was not to defeat Yi Guchen, but to make him retreat. Looking at this absurd scene, some of the people from the major forces and many of the super clans were secretly shocked. The sword sect's Yi Guchen, whose true chi had been crippled, had actually grown to such an extent. Ah, come on. When Yi Guchen saw this, not only did he not cower, but he also felt the blood in his body boiling. In the Saint Origin dynasty, how many people could enjoy the treatment of being surrounded by so many geniuses? Boom. Not only did Yi Guchen execute the secret skill of spirit devouring, but he also executed the flawless Vajra body. Even though his flawless Vajra body had only transformed by 50%, its degree of toughness was far beyond the indestructible Vajra body. In addition to his own perfect body, Yi Guchen's physical strength had already far surpassed those top-notch geniuses. Yi Guchen slashed down with his Xianming heavy sword, releasing a violent sword wave once again. At the same time, Yi Guchen extended his other hand and grasped the void. Golden true chi condensed into a golden longsword. The sword edge drew the trajectory of the great thousand world in the void and intertwined with each other. The ultimate move of the boundless heaven sword art, inescapable net. Two ultimate moves were executed by Yi Guchen at the same time. This scene shocked everyone. Using two different ultimate moves of the sword Dao at the same time. What level has the sword sect's understanding of the sword reached? Among the spectators, there were a few sword Dao grandmasters. They were all shocked when they saw Yi Guchen's dual sword divergent technique. Yi Guchen rarely executed the dual sword divergent technique. This was one of his trump cards. Now that he had executed it, the crowd was shocked. Even those from the Limitless Sword Sect were speechless at this moment. In their sect, there were not many people who could execute the spiritual level sword skill at the same time. Boom, boom, boom. When the moves collided, the air waves surged and turned the world upside down. Yi Guchen's physical body was under great pressure, but he still did not take a step back. On the other hand, Lung Ju and the others coughed up blood again and retreated. Yi Guchen's eyes flashed, and his figure flashed in front of the two geniuses from the Limitless Sword Sect. What are you doing? There was a trace of panic in the eyes of the two geniuses from the Limitless Sword Sect. As geniuses from the Sun Moon Hall, they were trembling like hamsters under the pressure of a wolf at this moment. When you attacked the disciples of the Sword Sect's Pagoda Forest, did you think this would happen? Yi Guchen's eyes were cold, and his tone was indifferent. Feeling the hint of murderous intent in Yi Guchen's words, the two geniuses' voices trembled. No. You can't kill us. This is the exchange. On the side of the Limitless Sword Sect, Xian Tai's face darkened when he saw this. If the geniuses from the Sun Moon Hall lost too badly in the hands of Yi Guchen, It would undoubtedly be a disgrace to him as the Sun Moon Hall master. Yi Guchen, it's enough that you've done enough. If you go too far, it won't be good for anyone. Xian Tai snorted coldly. His voice condensed into a line, and with a wave of spiritual pressure, it was transmitted to Yi Guchen's ears. Yi Guchen's mind shook. If it were not for the meteorite demonic soul butterfly, his mind would have been damaged. Xian Tai, don't go overboard. Feng Manlu sensed that something was wrong and stepped forward to stop Xian Tai. Yi Guchen ignored Xian Tai's threat. His eyes were extremely cold. Although he could not kill the two geniuses, it did not mean that they would not have to pay a price. Boom. Yi Guchen's Xianming heavy sword swept out without holding back. One of the geniuses from the Limitless Sword sect spat out blood and was sent flying. He landed heavily on the ground and fainted from his serious injuries. No. The other genius from the Limitless Sword sect turned around and wanted to run. Yi Guchen also swung his sword across the sky and sent him flying. Then he leaped into the air and stomped his foot. Boom. Yi Guchen stepped on the heaven's favorite's chest like a divine king stepping on the earth. Accompanied by the cracking sound of his sternum, the genius from the Sun Moon Hall fell into the pit filled with cracks like a dead dog. The entire martial arts arena was deathly silent. Chapter 419. Everyone in the arena didn't even dare to breathe loudly. The person that Yi Guchen was stepping on was the prodigy of the Limitless Sword sect's Sun Moon Hall. In the social gathering of the 7 major factions, there had never been a prodigy who had been defeated so miserably and was stepped on by someone else. This was undoubtedly a slap to the Limitless Sword sect's face. Not to mention that the Sun Moon Hall's hallmaster, Xian Tai, was still present. At this moment, some people secretly glanced at Xian Tai. Xian Tai was expressionless and didn't reveal any obvious anger. However, everyone could see that Xian Tai's eyes were as cold as an eternal ice abyss. Very good. Xian Tai didn't say much and only spat out 2 words coldly. However, this was even more chilling than cursing out loud. Yi Guchen didn't care about Xian Tai. He and the Limitless Sword sect were fated to be like fire and water. Since that was the case, why should he give them any face? Looking at the prodigy of the Sun Moon Hall who had collapsed at his feet, Yi Guchen didn't care. He turned to look at Morong Ditian. In the next moment, Yi Guchen executed the shadow step and pulled out an afterimage as he slashed his sword towards Morong Ditian. Seeing this, Morong Ditian's expression changed. He took out the Mara sword and executed his strongest move, Heaven Exhaustion Sword Art, Heaven-Reaching Universe. Sharp sword chi gushed out from the Mara sword as if it could tear the air apart. However, Yi Guchen's expression didn't change at all. The current Morong Ditian didn't pose any threat to him. Swish. Yi Guchen executed the Shadow Kill Sword Art, Instant Kill. Although instant kill was seen through by others, they would be on guard. However, in the current situation, how could Morong Ditian distinguish the real person in front of him? Boom. The sharp sword chi pierced through Yi Guchen's figure and came out of his body. Swish. The golden sword edge carried sharp sword chi and caused Morong Ditian's back to feel a piercing pain. He tried his best to dodge, but Yi Guchen's sword still pierced through his shoulder. Yi Guchen's eyes were cold as his true chi exploded forth, causing Morong Ditian's figure to be blasted backwards. Yi Guchen's figure flashed as he stepped forward. Puchi. Morong Ditian flew backwards like a kite with a broken string. A bloody hole appeared on his shoulder, and one could even see the white bones within. Another prodigy of the Limitless Sword sect was defeated by Yi Guchen. Everyone's gaze turned towards the Limitless Sword sect's side. The originally cold and arrogant disciples of the Limitless Sword sect did not even dare to breathe loudly at this moment. Xian Tai's expression was even colder. This time, the Limitless Sword sect had lost a lot of face. Damn it, Yi Guchen, you are too arrogant. Xian Feng's expression was cold. Although he said this, there was a faint trace of extreme fear in his eyes. Yi Guchen's strength had far exceeded his expectations. As for the rest of the prodigies, they were also trembling because of Yi Guchen's strength. Next, it's your turn. Yi Guchen's tone was indifferent as he pointed his sword at the black and white impermanence and Lung Ju. Whoosh. He used wave-like subtle steps, and his figure was like smoke as he charged towards the three of them. God-slaying sword technique, 3 paths. A tyrannical blood-red sword chi spread out from the golden blade. As he drew his sword, 3 terrifying blood-colored sword rivers appeared. They were like the 3 paths of the Yellow Springs, and they followed the 3 of them to attack. Scarlet Sun sword technique, heavenly flame explosion. In Wind sword technique, 9 In howl. 8 slashes of devil blade, 3 slashes of the river. The 3 of them executed their strongest moves respectively. As the sword chi and blade light clashed, the surrounding air seemed to be compressed and then exploded, causing cracks to appear on the ground. Lung Ju and the black and white impermanence retreated once again. On the other hand, Yi Guchen still did not retreat a single step. Damn it. Lung Ju and the other two's faces darkened. Although they were considered top prodigies, Yi Guchen's strength was even more terrifying. He was so powerful that they were extremely wary of him. If they were to join forces, wouldn't it be even worse if they were to fight alone? At the thought of this, the hearts of all the spectators trembled once again. At this moment, the other 2 of the 3 slashes also charged towards Yi Guchen. Yi Guchen, it's fine that you're not dead, but how dare you appear in this meeting so openly? Are you tired of living? Mo Juchen's gray hair fluttered in the wind as he held the sword burial blade with his only arm. His tone was extremely cold. He had a grudge against Yi Guchen for losing his arm, and it was already irreconcilable. Who can take the life of my sword sect? You? Yi Guchen raised his sword. It wasn't that he underestimated his opponent, or that he didn't care about his opponent. It was just that Mo Juchen didn't have the ability to fight against him. You're courting death. Mo Juchen immediately made his move. He poured his true energy into the sword burial blade, and a terrifying blood-red blade radiance tore through the air. Just as well. Let me have a taste of this legendary sword sect. Nieling also made his move. His blade seemed to be accompanied by the roar of 10,000 beasts as demonic aura surged into the sky. A cold light flashed across Lung Ju's eyes when he saw this. True energy surged into the demonic blade in his hand, and the spiritual rune array on it was activated. The demonic blade seemed to have awakened as a powerful demonic aura surged into the sky. The 3 slashes of the saber-conferred Monarch Hall had joined forces. Xianfeng and Xiandai also made their moves when they saw this. A total of 5 supreme prodigies attacked Yi Guchen from all directions at the same time. This scene caused an uproar in the entire arena. In the past, even top prodigies like Xian Hao and the Little War Emperor had never received such treatment. They had never been attacked by 5 supreme prodigies at the same time. Yi Guchen. Yan Wushuang, who had helped Ji Ling settle down, also had a hint of nervousness in her eyes. Facing such a lineup, even a top genius like her would have to avoid it. It would be difficult for her to face it head-on. As for the disciples of the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest, although they were extremely confident in Yi Guchen, the lineup before them really made them worry about Yi Guchen's situation. Yi Guchen, don't you know that the bird that sticks out gets shot? Let's see how miserable you will be in the end. Bai Zichen, who had retreated to the edge of the arena, thought coldly. He was already in such a sorry state. Naturally, he didn't want to see Yi Guchen turn the tide. Facing such a lineup, not only were the disciples of the Sword Sect Tower uneasy, but the other powers also felt the same. Because if it was Xian Hao and the Little War Emperor, they would have to avoid the 3 blades and the black and white impermanence. In their eyes, although Yi Guchen's strength had exceeded their expectations, he shouldn't be stronger than Xian Hao and the Little War Emperor. However, looking at the 5 people in front of him, Yi Guchen held the Xianming heavy sword in his hand horizontally. An extremely terrifying blood-red sword intent suddenly burst out. The Azura intent filled the entire arena. Everyone felt as if their necks were tightly gripped by a pair of hands. God-slaying sword art. Yama. Accompanied by a cold whisper. It was as if it was the whisper of Yama from hell. A terrifying blood-red figure rose from the ground behind Yi Guchen. Yi Guchen swung his sword horizontally. It was as if Yama had swung his sword and killed all living things. Chapter 420. The fifth form of the god-slaying sword art was already one of Yi Guqin's trump cards. Furthermore, the Shura sword intent boosted the god-slaying sword art. Therefore, at that moment, Yi Guqin's sword strike was extremely powerful. The blood-red Yama behind him seemed to be one with Yi Guqin's body. As Yi Guqin drew his sword, the crimson Yama drew his sword as well. The moment the sword appeared, the entire world seemed to reflect a blood-red radiance. Yi Guqin's sword and three blades collided with the black and white impermanence's attack. Boom! An earth-shattering explosion shook the heavens and the earth. Endless dust and air ripples swept out in all directions. Even the pyramid building was faintly trembling. Lungju, Nieling, Emojuechen, Xianfeng, and Xiandai were sent flying in the midst of the blood-red sword light. On the other side, Yi Guqin's bones crackled and many wounds appeared on his body. However, Yi Guqin still endured the terrifying shockwaves without taking a single step back. This was the pride of the sword sect. He couldn't be bothered to take a single step back. Whoosh! Yi Guqin used the shadow steps and left afterimages in his wake. He arrived in front of Mo Juechen and swung the Xianming heavy sword with a cold gaze. Mo Juechen gritted his teeth and dripped a drop of essence blood on the burial sword saber. The overflowing blood light made the entire saber exude a dense bloody aura. Blood sky returning dragon slash. Mo Juechen used all the true chi in his body and unleashed all his strength. He slashed out with his saber and a terrifying blood-red aura roared out like a blood dragon. Yi Guqin's other hand held the longsword made of true chi. The tip of the sword curved like a circle that could encompass everything. This was the Taiji sword art. Boom! Mo Juechen's attack was completely absorbed into the circle. However, Yi Guqin's hand that was holding onto his sword was slightly cracked and blood was flowing out of it. Bang! Yi Guqin flipped his hand and the blood dragon blade aura, which had been absorbed into the Taiji circle, shot out once again and struck Mo Juechen's chest. Poochie! Blood spurted out of Mo Juechen's body as he was sent flying and crashed to the ground. Yi Guqin didn't stop. He flashed in front of Nieling again. Nieling's expression changed drastically when he saw this, and he retreated explosively. He knew that he was no match for Yi Guqin at the moment. In the Void Sword realm, Yi Guqin had lost all his genuine chi and was looked down upon by him. Now Yi Guqin was so powerful that he almost lost his will to fight. Retreat. The only thought in Nieling's mind was to retreat from this battle arena. However, would it be that simple? Yi Guqin had said that he wouldn't easily let off anyone who attacked the Sword Sect's pagoda forest. In the blink of an eye, Yi Guqin's pitch-black eyes were swallowed by the color of blood. It was a pair of eyes that seemed to contain an Azura blood sea. Eye of Azura, activate. Countless Azura illusions appeared in Nieling's mind. He had broken through to the Divine Soul realm, and possessed a spiritual sea that was far stronger than ordinary people's. With the help of the meteorite butterfly, Yi Guqin's spiritual illusory technique became even more powerful and deadly. The cruel illusions released by the Eye of Azura made Nieling lose his mind. His head hurt so much that it felt like it was going to split open. Boom! Yi Guqin didn't hold back at all. His heavy sword smashed into Nieling's body, and the latter's body fell heavily to the ground. Cracks spread out around him as he collapsed into the pit. Then Yi Guqin didn't stop and charged toward Lungju again. Yi Guqin, don't be so arrogant. The two of them can't compare to me. Lungju said coldly when he saw Yi Guqin charging toward him. In my eyes, they're all the same. Yi Guqin's tone was calm. Arrogant. Lungju's genuine chi poured into the demonic saber in his hand. A spiritual rune array was activated once again. The demonic saber suddenly emitted an even more vigorous demonic aura. At the same time, a terrifying aura of sharpness spread out from the saber. Oh, an upper-grade mystical weapon? Yi Guqin looked at it and knew what it was. Lungju was obviously lucky to have obtained an upper-grade mystical weapon from somewhere. In the Saint Origin dynasty, it was almost impossible for a Heaven's Tribulation divine weapon to appear. Supreme-grade mystical weapons like the Blood Prison Sword and the Heavenly Demon General Armor were extremely rare. Therefore, superior-grade mystical rune divine weapons had instead become rare divine weapons. I obtained this demonic saber from a cave. At the same time, I also obtained the demonic saber 8 slashes, a lower-grade king saber technique. I, Lung Ju, am destined to become the king of sabers. You're just a stumbling block. Genuine chi exploded from Lung Ju's body as he slashed out with the demonic saber. Demonic saber 8 slashes, 4 sabers splitting waves. Lung Ju slashed out 4 times consecutively. Each slash was powerful enough to kill an expert in the 5th transformation of the Divine Soul Realm. However, Yi Guchen's expression remained indifferent. He struck out with his sword again, and at the same time, the purple lightning of the netherworld surged out. Lightning brilliance of the 9 heavens. The violent lightning and sword chi instantly tore apart Lung Ju's saber. This was the ultimate move of the horizontal lightning sword. With Yi Guchen's current comprehension and strength, it was naturally easy for him to execute it. Poof! Lung Ju spat out a mouthful of blood. However, Yi Guchen continued to charge forward and slashed out with his sword. Poof! Lung Ju spat out another mouthful of blood. Yi Guchen clenched his fist. Boundless purple lightning surged out from his arm and shot toward Lung Ju. Cough! Lung Ju spat out a mouthful of blood mixed with his shattered organs. His chest was charred black as his body crashed into the pyramid behind him. At this point, the 3 sabers of the sealed Saber Monarch Palace had all been defeated. There was no commotion in the arena. Instead, there was an eerie silence. The 3 sabers of the sealed Saber Monarch Palace were the strongest apart from Saber Maniac, who was ranked first on the Sky Saber list. However, they had been defeated in such a manner. Lung Ju and the others might not have fought with their lives on the line. However, Yi Guchen had also not revealed all of his trump cards. Therefore, this battle had already revealed a lot of problems. Yu Bufan's gaze was slightly complicated as he looked at the scene. His gaze once again fell onto Feng Manlu. Feng Manlu, I finally know who you have chosen. However, although Yi Guchen is strong, my disciple, Gu Zun, is not weak either. Yu Bufan shook his head slightly. Only he knew that Gu Zun had fought with Lung Ju before. Only Gu Zun, Lung Ju and Yu Bufan knew the result of that battle. Gu Zun had defeated Lung Ju with just 1 slash. This was why Yu Bufan was so confident that Gu Zun was the #1 Saber Dao expert among the younger generation in the Saint Origin dynasty. No one understood the saber better than Gu Zun. Similarly, no one understood the sword better than Yi Guchen. The battle at the Forbidden City Summit is going to be interesting. Yu Bufan thought to himself. Everyone was still immersed in Yi Guchen's victory over the 3 sabers. Yi Guchen's cold gaze shifted to Xian Feng and Xian Dai. Next, it's the 2 of you. Yi Guchen's indifferent tone made Xian Feng and Xian Dai's faces turn ugly. His tone did not sound like a challenge, but a casual sweep. Could it be that Yi Guchen is going to crush all the geniuses of the other forces by himself? Seeing Yi Guchen's action, the tens of thousands of spectators in the fighting arena widened their eyes. The shock in their eyes could not disappear. The astonished noise was like a tidal wave that surged through the entire arena. Today no one could compare to the sword sect. Even more arrogant. Chapter 421. Feeling the coldness in Yi Guchen's eyes, Xian Feng and Xian Dai's faces were a little ugly. They finally knew why Xian Hao was in such a sorry state in the Void Sword realm. It was not because Xian Hao was weak. It was because his opponent, Yi Guchen, was too strong. Yi Guchen, do you really want to completely anger my limitless sword sect? Xian Dai's pretty face was a little embarrassed. With their usual strength, they did not even bother to use the limitless sword sect. But now, if they were really crushed by Yi Guchen in front of everyone, their reputation as the black and white impermanents would fall by more than half. Don't you think it's ridiculous to say this now? Yi Guchen did not leave any leeway. His will would not be easily shaken by others. Without the slightest hesitation, Yi Guchen took a step forward and his body seemed to teleport. In the blink of an eye, he swept in front of Xian Feng and Xian Dai. Yi Guchen, each of us taking a step back is giving you face. Do you really think you are invincible? Seeing that Yi Guchen did not have the slightest intention of backing down, Xian Feng shouted coldly. He and Xian Dai attacked again. And this time, the power of the sword was stronger than before. Sacred Sun Sword Technique, Scorching Sun Strike. Xianfeng's body surged with genuine qi, with a blazing aura, like the sun. He slashed out with his sword, and the blazing sword light was as dazzling as the sun, with a strong fluctuation of sword qi. Xiandai also used her trump card. New Moon Sword Technique, Full Moon Hook. Xiandai was wearing a black dress, which outlined her slim figure. She pointed out with her sword, and the sword light was like a crescent moon, with a very clever arc, attacking Yi Guqin from the side. If Xianfeng's sword was like the sun, breaking through everything, Xiandai was like a poisonous snake in the dark, attacking from the side. The cooperation between the two could be said to be seamless. The Saint Sun Sword Codex and the New Moon Sword Codex are the lower-grade king-level sword techniques in the Limitless Sword sect, second only to the Limitless Sword Technique. What's even more commendable is that these two sword techniques are a combination sword technique. If they are used together, their power is comparable to a middle-grade king-level sword technique. The black and white deities of impermanence were also famous geniuses. Therefore, their trump cards were well known by everyone. Seeing them display their trump cards, the spectators in the fighting arena were all surprised. Facing the attacks of the two, Yi Guqin's expression remained calm. His Xianming heavy sword swept out and met Xianfeng's attack. Then, with a flick of his other hand, the six-pulse divine sword qi spread out and turned into rays of finger light that swept toward Xiandai. Boom, boom, boom. Sword light and qi radiance shot out in all directions like dazzling flowers. Xianfeng closed in and attacked. His swordsmanship had a kind of yang like the sun, and it was straightforward. However, Yi Guqin, who was holding the Xianming heavy sword, was obviously stronger than Xianfeng. In his mind, he silently comprehended the true essence of the edgeless sword essence. Gradually, he no longer displayed a certain sword technique. Instead, he chopped, slashed, cut, and other basic sword techniques. As he unleashed his simple sword aura, waves of terrifying shockwaves spread out with a loud bang. The edgeless sword essence was not focused on the sharpness of the sword, but on the power of the shock and destruction of Mount Tai. Damn it, what kind of sword technique is this? Xianfeng's face was ugly. Facing Yi Guqin, he felt as if he was facing Mount Tai. It was as if he was under great pressure. When Yi Guqin displayed this technique, some ordinary experts present couldn't feel anything, but some experts who were deeply immersed in the sword Dao, as well as divine dwelling experts, could clearly feel that a powerful sword intent seemed to be brewing in Yi Guqin's body. This child's talent in the sword Dao is really amazing. Xiantai's voice was indifferent. Although Yi Guqin had completely aroused his killing intent, even a divine dwelling expert like him had to admit that Yi Guqin's talent in the sword Dao was amazing. On the other side, the corners of Feng Manla's mouth curved in a smile. Yi Guqin had never let him down. The other divine dwelling experts present also felt the sword intent that Yi Guqin was brewing. It should be said that Yi Guqin was already an expert with 2 sword intents. If he comprehended another sword intent, he would have 3 sword intents. With such talent, let alone the Saint Origin Empire, even in the entire Nantian region, he could be regarded as one of the top sword Dao heaven prides. Saint Sun Sword Codex, 10 Sun's Brilliant Sun. Xianfeng's entire body erupted with true qi, surging into the sword in his hand. How could he be willing to be Yi Guqin's sword test stone? Accompanied by his attack, there seemed to be 10 blazing sword rays appearing, like 10 suns in the sky. This was one of the most powerful killing moves in the Saint Sun Sword Codex. New Moon Sword Codex, Blood Crescent Moon. Xiandai also didn't dare to hide her strength. She cooperated with Xianfeng and swung her sword. The sword edge cut through the void, carrying a crescent-like arc. It was just that the sword light was blood red and looked like a blood moon. Swoosh! As the black and white impermanence's ultimate moves erupted, the surrounding air screamed, and true qi boiled and spread out. In the face of the two's joint attack, Yi Guqin's face was calm. He held the Xianming heavy sword in one hand and comprehended the edgeless sword essence, displaying the 10,000 ripples of the void. On the other hand, he condensed his true qi into a sword. Supported by the Azura sword essence, and displayed the fourth move of the god-slaying sword technique, 3 roads. Only Yi Guqin could use 2 different sword essences, and display 2 different sword techniques at the same time. This was all thanks to his dual sword technique. Boom. When the sword edges collided, the sword rays intersected, and true qi surged. The strong impact of the impact overturned the surrounding ground. Yi Guqin's feet were still rooted to the ground, and he didn't take a step back. Xianfeng and Xiandai both retreated once again, coughing up blood. Although they were top geniuses, even Xianhao couldn't ignore them when they worked together. However, Yi Guqin was able to wield 2 swords at once. It was as if there were 2 people at the same time. Moreover, even if the 2 of them were connected, how could they compare to Yi Guqin's thoughts? So this time, the black and white impermanence lost. Looking at the black and white impermanence coughing up blood, the entire arena fell into silence. First, it was the saber-conferred King Palace's 3 blades. The black and white impermanents were behind them. Was there really not a single prodigy who could stop the sword grandmaster today? Brother Feng, we can still fight. Xiandai was unwilling to accept this. She was proud and arrogant, so how could she swallow this? Forget it. Although we still have some trump cards, Yi Guqin hasn't really tried his best. Moreover, Xianhao hasn't made a move yet. Why should we fight the sword master to the death? Xianfeng whispered, his eyes flickering. Well, we'll let the sword master go today. Xiandai snorted. Her tone was as if she had defeated Yi Guqin and let him go. Looking at the black and white impermanents retreating, Yi Guqin ignored them. He turned his gaze to the Shengyuan Academy again. Yuan Mie was covered in blood and looked quite miserable. Yi Guqin's eyes were indifferent as he walked over. On the Shengyuan Academy's side, the expressions of Princess Yuan Shi and the others suddenly changed. Chapter 422. Feng Chun in particular looked at Yi Guqin with a touch of fear in his eyes. Yi Guqin had already cast a huge shadow on Feng Chun back in the Void Sword realm. Especially when Yi Guqin had triggered the lightning tide of annihilation. Feng Chun had risked his life to escape with Prince Yuanyi. Feng Chun would never forget that nightmarish scene for the rest of his life. Feng Chun was extremely nervous when he saw Yi Guqin facing them. All the spectators were speechless when they saw Yi Guqin targeting Saint Origin Academy again. First, he had defeated the saber-conferred Monarch Hall 3 times, then crushed the black and white impermanence of the Limitless Sword sect. Now he was facing Saint Origin Academy again. Could it be that the Sword sect is really going to sweep through the geniuses of all the other forces with a single strike today? Many people thought so. Prime Sovereign Saber Maniac and the young War Emperor hadn't arrived yet. LV Qinghan, Xianhao Zhoutong, and the others hadn't made a move yet. How many people could contend with Yi Guqin now? On Saint Origin Academy's side, Princess Yuan Shi snorted coldly when she saw this. Her expression was a little unnatural. Before the start of the exchange, both Princess Yuan Shi and Mo Lengyia had looked at Yi Guqin with disdain. Because to them, they could say whatever they wanted about a dead person. In any case, they wouldn't have to pay any price. But now, Yi Guqin had appeared in front of them. Not only that, but he had also defeated everyone. The saber-conferred Monarch Hall and the Limitless Sword sect's geniuses couldn't stop Sword sect. And now Yi Guqin was pointing his spear at them. You don't have to care about my business. Yuan Mie said coldly when he saw Yi Guqin arrive. He didn't appreciate his kindness. He was a lone wolf walking in the night. He had no companions and didn't need friends. To Yuan Mie, life was a cruel journey and endless revenge. His only goal was to kill Crown Prince Yuanyi and the Empress to avenge his mother. Back then in the heavenly wasteland plains, Xia Yubing and the others worked together to hunt me down. You opened up a path for me with a single sword strike. Now I'm returning the favor with a single sword strike. Yi Guqin's tone was similarly calm. He didn't want to become friends with Yuan Mie because he knew that a person like Yuan Mie wouldn't have friends. He just didn't want to owe anyone a favor. Yi Guqin remembered how Xia Shishir had casually helped him out in the beginning, and he eventually returned the favor. Not to mention the favor of Yuan Mie's sword. Back then, I just wanted to use you to deal with Prince Yuanyi. Yuan Mie's tone was still indifferent, but there was a hint of complicated emotions in his eyes. I only recognize the results, and I'll only return you a sword strike, Yi Guqin said calmly. Yi Guqin, aren't you looking down on us a little too much? Do you think you can beat us back with a single sword strike? Queen Yuan, she bit her red lips with her pearly white teeth. She was a little embarrassed to be looked down upon by Yi Guqin. But she didn't dare to say anything harsh because Yi Guqin's domineering way of sweeping away everything had completely stunned her. Thinking back, Queen Yuan, she didn't quite believe what Feng Chen had said before. After all, killing 100 people with a single sword strike and destroying the Thunder Tide wasn't something that a divine soul realm cultivator could do. So Queen Yuan, she also thought that it was a false rumor and an exaggeration. But now, seeing was believing. And Queen Yuan, she couldn't help but doubt it. There really was someone as outstanding as Yi Guqin in the world. At this moment, Mo Lengia was furious when he heard Yi Guqin's words. He really couldn't hold it in and said coldly, Yi Guqin, although you're a sword master, you're too arrogant. You want to beat the three of us with a single sword strike? Who do you think you are? Although Mo Lengia knew that Yi Guqin was extremely powerful, his arrogant and unruly character was unable to swallow his anger. That was why he spoke up. Yi Guqin's eyes were indifferent. He really wasn't interested in the geniuses of Saint Origin Academy, because most of the people in Saint Origin Academy were nobles, princes, and princesses. They were all flowers in a greenhouse. Apart from Yuan Mia, the others, such as Prince Yuanyi and Princess Yuanxi, all relied on abundant cultivation resources and various divine weapons and Dharma artifacts to obtain the title of elites. Such geniuses who relied on resources and divine weapons were weaker than other forces and couldn't arouse Yi Guqin's interest at all. This sword strike is too much for you. Yi Guqin didn't say anything else and formed the Shura sword will. It was still the god-slaying sword technique, Yama's sword. This move had killed 100 people with a single sword strike and repelled 3 blades, and the black and white impermanence. It was a waste to use it against Queen Yuanxi and the others. Yi Guqin, you're too presumptuous. Queen Yuan, she shouted angrily. No matter how afraid she was of Yi Guqin, she was furious when she heard Yi Guqin's words. She took out a pair of golden rings, the edges of which were extremely sharp. As the golden rings spun, the air seemed to be torn apart. The light of the spiritual rune formation flashed on the golden rings. It was obviously a high-grade divine weapon with spiritual runes. Mo Lengia was even more unconvinced. His genuine chi surged, and the blood-red spear in his hand shone with a terrifying bloody light. Yi Guqin, let me see how arrogant you are. Mo Lengia was extremely unconvinced of Yi Guqin. Now that he had the chance, he attacked with all his might. However, boom. Yama's sword was not easy to block. Even though Queen Yuanxi and Mo Lengia were prepared, they still felt a terrifying killing intent when they faced the sword strike. It was as if it was going to shatter their hearts and souls. Feng Chen retreated quickly, without a trace of fighting spirit in his heart. Puff! There was no suspense. Both Queen Yuanxi and Mo Lengia were sent flying, spitting red blood from their mouths. Yi Guqin's footsteps flashed. His eyes were calm as he stepped towards Mo Lengia. Yi Guqin, how dare you? On the spectator stand, the leader of Saint Origin Academy, Hun Tianho, shouted angrily. Hun Tianho, your threat is against the rules of the exchange, Deputy Sect Master Qin Yang of the 9 Profound Sects said. Boom. As if he did not hear Hun Tianho's threat, Yi Guqin stomped on Mo Lengia's chest. Yi Guqin's foot cracked the blood armor on his body. One should know how strong Yi Guqin's physical strength was. It was far superior to those of the same level. Puff. Mo Lengia felt that his internal organs were about to be shattered, and he spat out another mouthful of blood. Bang. Mo Lengia was stomped into a deep pit, his blood-stained body twitching. Yi Guqin's expression did not change, and he turned to Queen Yuanxi again. Seeing this, Queen Yuanxi turned pale and shouted, I am the Queen of Saint Origin Dynasty. You can't treat me like this. Yi Guqin, you should know the status of the Queen. Don't be so presumptuous. Hun Tianho could no longer bear it, and his voice boomed like thunder. The young Marquis was already humiliated to be trampled by Yi Guqin like this. If a princess was trampled on by Yi Guchen in front of so many people, how would the royal family be able to maintain their dignity? Is status that important? Even if you are the queen of a country, you will face the same fate if you offend a disciple of the sword sect. Yi Guchen ignored Han Tianhou and pressed down on Queen Yuanxi. No. Queen Yuanxi's eyes were filled with hatred. However, she still could not resist, and she followed in Mo Langya's footsteps, being stomped to the ground by Yi Guchen. This noble and arrogant queen was now in a sorry state, lying paralyzed in a deep pit, her golden dress stained with blood. Everyone present felt a chill in their hearts. Chapter 423. Empress Yuan. She was the daughter of the Yuan Emperor, the emperor of the Saint Yuan dynasty. The Saint Yuan dynasty not only had a strong foundation, but it had also given birth to a force like the Saint Yuan Academy. As for the other forces, although they weren't particularly afraid of the Saint Yuan dynasty, they generally wouldn't provoke them. Even if they did, they wouldn't go too far. After all, they were rooted in someone else's territory, and they still needed to show respect. But Yi Guchen didn't care about Empress Yuanxi's noble identity, and directly trampled her to the ground like the others. Such boldness wasn't something that ordinary people could possess. The hearts of the disciples of the Sword Sect's tower were beating wildly, and their faces were flushed red with excitement. This was because they knew that Yi Guchen's tyrannical action was to seek justice for the Sword Sect's tower. As Yi Guchen had said before, no matter who you were, as long as you provoked the Sword Sect's tower, this would be your end. Yi Guchen, how dare you? Han Tianhou's aura sword, and the unparalleled pressure of a divine dwelling expert, as well as the spirit pressure of a mountain of corpses and a sea of blood, blasted towards Yi Guchen. As a marquis of the divine dwelling stage in the Saint Origin Empire, Han Tianhou's murderous aura wasn't something ordinary people could withstand. However, in the face of such an imposing aura, Yi Guchen frowned coldly. The Azura sword intent erupted with terrifying murderous intent that wasn't any weaker than Han Tianhou's. It was just that Han Tianhou's powerful aura made Yi Guchen's body creak, but he still didn't take a single step back. Han Tianhou, do you think I don't exist? Feng Manlu took a step forward, flicked his sleeve, and dissolved Han Tianhou's pressure. Hovering in the air, Han Tianhou looked down at Yi Guchen and said coldly, Feng Manlu, you'd better warn Yi Guchen that he's hot-blooded, but too much will easily break. Okay. Feng Manlu nodded. Lord Feng Manlu. Many disciples of the Sword Sect's tower, and even some elders, wanted to say something, but hesitated. Yi Guchen, listen to me, Feng Manlu said calmly. Yi Guchen frowned slightly, but his expression did not change. Uncle Feng. Yan Wushuang bit her red lips. She did not believe that Feng Manlu would compromise with Han Tian. Even if Feng Manlu's cultivation had fallen to the spiritual bridge stage, the pride of a Sword King wouldn't crumble so easily. Could it be that the Wind Sword King is going to compromise with the Sword Sect? I think it's possible. After all, the former obscure Sword King is only at the spirit bridge of heaven and earth stage, which is far from the divine dwelling stage. Many people sighed. As for what Feng Manlu had said about the divine dwelling stage, they naturally did not take it to heart. That's more like it. Huan Tianhou coldly snorted. Just when everyone thought that Wind Sweeping Tower would be pressured by the limitless Sword Sect, Saint Origin Academy, and other forces, Yi Guchen would restrain himself. However, Feng Manlu said calmly, Yi Guchen, feel free to make your move during this exchange. As for the rest, I, Feng Manlu, will shoulder it. Feng Manlu stood in the air with his hands behind his back. His body was like a divine sword. His handsome face was incomparably calm, as if he was saying something insignificant. A gust of wind blew over, brushing the black hair in front of Feng Manlu's forehead. His pair of blind eyes, however, seemed to be hiding a light that looked down on the world. Lord Feng Manlu. The eyes of many disciples of the Sword Sect Pagoda turned red. After the battle with Yubufan, Feng Manlu had been secretly attacked by an unknown expert, and had fallen to the spiritual bridge stage. The Sword Sect Pagoda had been in closed-door cultivation for 10 years. But now, When Feng Manlu said that he would shoulder it, everyone in the sword sect pagoda seemed to see the high-spirited obscure sword king, who had once shaken the world, return. Feng Manlu you. Huan Tianho's aura surged, and his eyes were extremely cold. You can make a move if you want, but you have to wait until after the exchange, Feng Manlu said indifferently. That's right, Huan Tianho. We are still in the midst of the exchange. Sect Master Qingyang stood out. Let's wait until after the exchange, Yu Bufan said with a sigh. Huan Tianho snorted when he saw Sect Master Qingyang and Yu Bufan stand out. He secretly exchanged glances with Xian Tai, Grandma Shichuan, Yin Emperor, and the others. They understood each other's intentions. Whether it was Yi Guqin or Feng Manlu, they would not let them off easily. After the exchange, there would definitely be a conflict. Yi Guqin looked coldly at Queen Yuanxi, who was under his feet. He stepped over her. Princess Yuan. She was so angry that she almost vomited blood. She was the princess of a dynasty, but she had been stepped over like a stepping stone. This kind of humiliation was absolutely unacceptable to the proud and arrogant Princess Yuanxi. Yi Guqin, just you wait. I will definitely make you kneel before me like a dog in the future. Princess Yuanxi screamed, her beautiful face full of resentment. Yi Guqin ignored her. If this was not the exchange, he would definitely let Princess Yuanxi know what it meant to say that trouble comes from a loose tongue. Yi Guqin glanced around and saw Feng Chun, who had a look of fear on his face. He ignored him and turned to look at Zitherfairy, whose clothes were stained with blood. He then looked at Runtingting. Without the slightest hesitation, Yi Guqin flashed forward. Are you alright? Yi Guqin looked at the peerless beauty in pink clothes in front of him, and asked calmly, I'm fine. As long as you are well, I'm fine. Seeing the figure that she had been thinking about day and night land in front of her, Zitherfairy's eyes were filled with joy and her face blushed. Not far away, Zhou Tong looked at this scene indifferently, a dark shadow gathering in his eyes. I'm sorry. The sect has to keep the news that I'm alive a secret, so. Yi Guqin said apologetically. I understand. Zitherfairy wiped the blood from the corner of her mouth, her breath weak. Yi Guqin's eyes darkened. He could see that Zitherfairy was seriously injured. The person who attacked Zitherfairy did not hold back at all. Yi Guqin looked at Runtingting with his cold, dark eyes. Yi Guqin, what are you doing? We have no grudge against each other. Although Runtingting was also a prodigy in the 9 transformations divine soul realm, after seeing Yi Guqin's ferocity, she no longer had any confidence. Seeing Yi Guqin's cold eyes looking at her, she felt a little guilty. Previously, because of her relationship with Zhou Tong, she had slandered Yi Guqin to the extreme, and all kinds of dirty words came out of her mouth. Mr. Yi, why don't we both take a step back? A figure dressed in white arrived, her voice clear like a waterfall. It was LV Qinghan. She did not like Runtingting attacking Zitherfairy. However, Runtingting was from Consonance Palace, and she was a top prodigy in Consonance Palace. If Yi Guqin targeted Zitherfairy, it would be unreasonable if she did not stop him. Looking at the beautiful figure in front of him, Yi Guqin's eyes were calm. I said that we will meet again. But if you stop me, our meeting will turn into a clash of swords, Yi Guqin said slowly. LV Qinghan was stunned. Then, as if she thought of something, she froze on the spot. You are. LV Qinghan had always been cold, but at this moment, she could not hide the surprise in her eyes. The surprise that Yi Guqin brought to her was too great. Chapter 424. Others might not know what Yi Guqin meant by this sentence, but LV Qinghan knew. Back at the gem forging building, when she invited the young man with the bamboo hat, that young man said that they would meet again soon. Now, the same words came from Yi Guqin's mouth. Although in LV Qinghan's memory, that young man's voice was deeper, there was no doubt that it was Yi Guqin in front of her. Tung. Yi Guqin. Ah, so that's how it is. LV Qinghan once again thought of Yi Guqin's alias and instantly understood. The sword sex Yi Guqin in front of him was the same person as the genius blacksmith who had amazed everyone at the blacksmith convention. It was also because of this that LV Qinghan was so surprised. A person already had monstrous talent in blacksmithing. If he had monstrous talent in blacksmithing, the head of the Gongsun family, Gongsun Xianlong, had publicly judged that Yi Guqin might become a 4-star or even 5-star blacksmith in the future. Just this identity alone meant that Yi Guqin was destined to be extraordinary in the future. LV Qinghan could not imagine how far Yi Guqin would grow in the future. Qinghan now understands why junior sister Qin misses you day and night. LV Qinghan took a deep look at Yi Guqin. She had some doubts before about how outstanding Yi Guqin was to make Zither Fairy so sad. He was thinner than a yellow flower. Now it seemed that LV Qinghan knew that she was wrong. Yi Guqin was not inferior to Zhou Tong at all. In fact, he was even stronger. Senior sister, what are you talking about? Zither Fairy's delicate face was slightly red as she bit her jade lips. Yi Guqin was slightly taken aback and glanced at Zither Fairy. Zither Fairy lowered her head slightly, and her heart was beating wildly. Yi Guqin's gaze was slightly complicated. He did not say much and looked at LV Qinghan. Get out of the way. You should know that you can't stop me. LV Qinghan bit her cherry lips. An outstanding woman like her would be pursued and adored wherever she went. Yet, Yi Guqin spoke to her in such a tone. However, LV Qinghan also knew that although she was not too afraid of Yi Guqin, if Yi Guqin used his full strength, she might not be able to block him. Sighing softly, LV Qinghan finally took a step back. Senior sister LV sister, what are you doing? We're from the same sect. Qinghan Yi Guqin saw that LV Qinghan had no intention of intervening. You LV Chen's eyes use yes she's words. She was Yi Luan's Yi was the sex sect. She was was Yi was there was her? Yi was she? LV Qinghan, you're the same as that Zither Fairy. You're both traitors. Ren Tingting screamed. Yi Guqin furrowed his brows and rushed forward. Yi was his was sex was of course is? Is. Stop you brat. Granny Shichuan coldly shouted from the Consonant's Divine Palace's viewing platform. Rin Tingting was her disciple. How could she stand by and watch Yi Guqin make a move on her? Granny Shichuan, what do you take this exchange for? Sect Master Qingyang asked. With Yi Guqin's actions and the divine dwelling experts of two factions threatening them, what was the point of holding the exchange? The other spectators also looked at Granny Shichuan with a trace of disdain in their eyes. These divine dwelling experts are really petty. They only allowed their disciples to attack others. Now that the sword sect has appeared, they're hopping mad again. In the Gongsun clan's viewing platform, Gongsun Xiaoye pursed her lips. Although she was also a disciple of the Consonant's Divine Palace, like LV Qinghan and Qinghan Yi Guqin, she was a disciple of the Palace Master's faction. Xiaoye, don't speak nonsense, Gongsun Xianlong said in a low voice. Although he didn't like the way these divine dwelling experts behaved, it wasn't something they could casually discuss. Granny Shichuan felt a little embarrassed when she sensed the gazes of disdain directed at her. However, she couldn't watch Ren Tingting be humiliated, so she said, Yi Guqin, you've already committed a grave mistake by killing my disciple, Pan Shuelian. You can't repeat the same mistake today. Granny Shichuan's tone was icy cold. However, Yi Guqin found her words laughable. Pan Shuelian had attacked him and Qinghan Yi Guqin, but he had made a grave mistake by killing Pan Shuelian? Not only did Granny Shichuan's actions fail to make Yi Guqin feel the slightest bit of fear, it even had the opposite effect. Without the slightest hesitation, Yi Guqin swung his Xianming heavy sword. Void sword art, 10,000 void ripples. The ferocious sword wave seemed to cause the void to boil. The power of this move ignored all defenses. Ren Tingting's expression changed drastically when she saw this. She lashed out with the whip in her hand, creating a powerful whip of chi shadows. However, this was still unable to stop Yi Guqin's attack. Although her cultivation was also at the 9 changes divine soul transformation, her combat power was far from comparable to Yi Guqin's. Poochie. Without the slightest suspense, Ren Tingting was sent flying while vomiting blood. Her bones felt as if they had fallen apart, and the powerful shock force invaded her internal organs. The intense pain made Ren Tingting's face turn incomparably pale. Yi Guqin's expression was cold, without the slightest trace of sympathy. Rin Tingting had been extremely ruthless when she attacked Qinghan Yiguchen earlier. She didn't have the slightest bit of camaraderie, as if they were sworn enemies. Since that was the case, Yiguchen wouldn't hold back either. Boom. He stomped his foot on Ren Tingting's chest. Ren Tingting's towering bosom looked like it was about to explode. Once again, Ren Tingting spat out a mouthful of blood, mixed with her shattered internal organs. Spare me, Yiguchen. I was wrong. Ren Tingting's mouth was full of blood as she admitted defeat. She recalled how she had looked down on Yiguchen and cursed endlessly. Qinghan Yiguchen had even angered Qinghan Yiguchen to the point of bleeding from the corner of her mouth. However, retribution came so quickly. Yiguchen's gaze was indifferent. He didn't hold back just because Ren Tingting was a woman. He kicked Ren Tingting away once again and ignored her. Ren Tingting's delicate body slammed into the pyramid and fainted. The corners of Grandma Shichuan's eyes twitched when she saw this scene. Her shriveled hands clenched slightly. She looked at Yiguchen with a murderous look in her eyes. However, Yiguchen ignored her. There were many people who wanted to kill him, but it was still unknown who would emerge victorious in the end. After dealing with the Consonance Palace, Yiguchen turned his gaze to the other prodigies. There was no need to mention the 9 Profound Sect. Chun-Yi by Yenji and the others were on good terms with Yiguchen, so they nodded to each other in greeting. At this moment, a hearty laugh sounded. I've always heard of the sword sect's Yiguchen. Today, I finally get to meet you. You are indeed extraordinary. You are indeed a dragon among men. The person who spoke was dressed in white and holding a folding fan. It was the little spirit emperor Zhou Tong. Hearing this, Yiguchen looked at him with a deep gaze. Although Zhou Tong had a smile on his face and seemed very interested in befriending him, Yiguchen felt that Zhou Tong wasn't such a simple person. Moreover, Ji Yan had died at his hands. Would Zhou Tong, who was also one of the 3 little spirit emperors, have any good intentions towards him? Yiguchen didn't dare to agree. However, since Zhou Tong didn't provoke him, Yiguchen had no interest in fighting with him. He nodded slightly and directly ignored him. The smile on Zhou Tong's face slowly faded, but his eyes were cold. He was extremely unhappy with Yiguchen's attitude. However, Yiguchen didn't care about Zhou Tong at this moment. This was because the only person who could threaten him in the entire arena was standing at the top of the pyramid. That was on the platform at the top. That was the first position. Yiguchen raised his head slightly and looked at the figure standing there. For a moment, the entire arena seemed to have quieted down. They knew that Yiguchen's upcoming battle wouldn't be so simple. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.